the Midlands, particularly by the afternoon, and thunderstorms are possible, dropping a lot of rain in a short space of time. So we do have a Met Office warning in place, but they're going to be hit and miss. Most places won't see those downpours, and temperatures more widely in the high 20s. 30 Celsius is possible. Still the potential for those thunderstorms over parts of Wales and the Midlands in particular well into the evening, and perhaps then drifting north as we head into Saturday night and Sunday. So maybe Northern Ireland, a continued risk of thunderstorms on Sunday. But again, most places will be pretty warm and humid with hazy sunshine. Bye for now.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12 noon, a very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up this Friday lunchtime, the latest live pictures in Annecy as local people share their shock with the events of yesterday. French President Emmanuel Macron has visited the stabbed British toddler and her family in a hospital in Grenoble. An update being given on the medical condition. The 3-year-old, now named as Etty, is said to be in a stable condition after undergoing surgery. And President Macron due there in Annecy in the next half hour. We'll have the latest live view from France. 100 years behind bars, what Trump could be facing as he's charged with handling secret files after leaving the White House. He's accused of conspiracy, false statements, and illegally retaining classified documents. He's described it as a dark day for America. An Atlantic declaration, but no trade deal, as the Tory manifesto promised in 2019. Sunak champions the indispensable alliance. Biden champions the special relationship. What does that mean in pounds and dollars? And get your sun hats and your umbrellas out. We're going to be hotter than Ibiza, Marbella and Tenerife this weekend, just before the thunderstorms and torrential rain are forecast. First, the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. French President Emmanuel Macron has visited an injured British toddler and her family in hospital. The 3-year-old, named as Etty, was stabbed yesterday in the French Alps. She's now said to be in a stable condition. The Syrian refugee who stabbed a group of toddlers in the city of Annecy had been denied asylum in the country just days before the attack. The French Interior Minister says the claim was refused because the 31-year-old had already been granted asylum in Sweden 10 years ago. The French Prime Minister has confirmed all 4 toddlers injured in yesterday's attack have now undergone surgery. 2 are still understood to be in a critical condition. 2 adults were also injured. One of them was 78-year-old Yusuf.
I was sat on the bench. Suddenly, he stood in front of me and tried to stab me with his knife, and I made a movement with my left arm to try and avoid the blow. Fortunately, I was only injured slightly, very slightly in the elbow. Afterwards, I was treated by the fire brigade and paramedics. He was being followed by civilians, so he ran away to the left. He attacked other people, I think, and was caught by the police. I heard the shot.
Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted on charges of retaining classified documents at his Florida estate. A source close to the case says he faces 7 charges. This is the 2nd time Trump has been indicted. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Posting on his social media platform, Trump has accused the government of election interference. He's campaigning to make a return to the White House in 2024.
This is warfare for the law, and we can't let it happen. We can't let it happen. Our country is going to hell, and they come after Donald Trump, weaponizing the Justice Department, weaponizing the FBI. We can't let this continue to go on because it's ripping our country to shreds. We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them. It's a hoax.
Back here, the Prime Minister says President Joe Biden's experience on China and foreign policy is particularly valuable after signing a new economic partnership with the US. The new Atlantic Declaration includes commitments on easing trade barriers, closer defence industry ties and a data protection deal. Rishi Sunak's called the relationship with the US an indispensable alliance. A teenage boy who died after being followed by police on his e-bike and then collided with an ambulance has been named locally as Saul Cookson. Greater Manchester Police said traffic officers had been following the 15-year-old yesterday in Salford until their car was blocked off by bollards. The force said the collision between the bike and ambulance happened a short time later. The incident has been referred to a police watchdog. The government has announced plans to suspend the windfall tax on oil and gas companies if prices fall to normal levels for a sustained period. Currently, a 75% tax rate is imposed on oil and gas firms. This would be reduced to 40%. The windfall tax was introduced last year to help fund a scheme to lower energy bills for households and businesses. A watchdog says public trust in police has fallen to the lowest level ever and is hanging by a thread. It comes amid a series of scandals and systemic failings. Chief Inspector of Constabulary Andy Cook says he wants legal powers for inspectors to order failing police forces to improve. He says there needs to be definitive action to improve the standards instead of what he describes as glossy strategies and mission statements. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has abandoned Labour's commitment to spending £28 billion a year on a green prosperity plan. Instead, she says the party will gradually increase spending over the course of Parliament. Ms Reeves explained economic circumstances have changed since the announcement 2 years ago, saying Labour now wants to commit to spending only what's needed. And GB News presenter Anne Diamond has revealed she's been diagnosed with breast cancer. Known for her work on ITV, the BBC and, of course, here on Breakfast with Stephen and Anne, she's been speaking to us of her fight against the disease, including undergoing a double mastectomy. Anne told us how she found out she was being awarded with an OBE on the very same day as her diagnosis.
That was like 9:30 in the morning, but I knew then, because I'd already seen my GP, that I had to go to a breast cancer screening thing. And I spent the entire morning at my local hospital. They did everything: biopsies, x-rays, CT scans, couple of mammograms, everything. And in the end, by lunchtime, I was still there. And a lovely lady with a lanyard around her neck that said Macmillan Cancer Care. And I knew then that it was serious.
Anne will be returning to GB News to host Breakfast with Stephen Dixon tomorrow, and we're all very much looking forward to seeing her back here. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back over to Mark.
Rhiannon, thanks very much and welcome back to GB News Live. We can tell you the French President, Emmanuel Macron, is due at the park in Annecy in about 20 minutes' time. These are the pictures there live. You can see the balloons and flowers now being laid. Many people still coming to share their thoughts after those 4 children and the pensioner was stabbed there, of course, yesterday. Just to also bring you up to date that President Macron and his wife Brigitte have met the family of the British toddler, 3-year-old now named as Etty. We don't have a family name as yet. At University Hospital in Grenoble, that's about an hour and a half away from Annecy. Also an update we have on 2 French toddlers, Ennio and Alba, who were also stabbed, stable but still critical in intensive care. And then the 22-month-old Dutch baby, Peter, who is undergoing specialist care in Geneva, about 30 miles away, of course, in Switzerland. In terms of the investigations continuing, we now have more on the man who's in custody, arrested, this 31-year-old Syrian who had tried to claim asylum in France. That had been refused on Sunday, the French authorities have now revealed, because he'd previously been granted that status in Sweden 10 years ago. And also we understand that he has been living effectively homeless in Annecy since he arrived there. So that is now part of the investigation underway. Let's get the very latest now and speak to journalist Peter Allen, who can join us from Paris. Peter's been following this story. And clearly, Peter, President Macron and the First Lady there wanting to meet the families directly involved, particularly this British family.
Yes, that was very important to them, Mark. They went into the hospital. I imagine clearly they weren't allowed to spend too much time with the young children themselves, of course, extremely ill still, and there's a lot of work still to be done by the surgeons. But as you say, Emmanuel Macron, Brigitte Macron, they thought it was hugely important for the main representative of the French Republic to show their sympathy and indeed their anger and frustration. These kind of attacks keep happening. So very, very important show there by Emmanuel Macron.
But clearly, in terms of the authorities, they're trying to piece this story together. We now know that they have ruled out terrorist sort of involvement, but an indication that this man had his application for France turned down on Sunday because of the position in Sweden. But he'd been effectively homeless, living on the streets of the city for some time.
He had, yes. There's a very, very strong feeling, I have to say, Mark. I've just been speaking to the authorities, the Interior Ministry here in Paris, that he may well be suffering from very, very serious psychological problems, which doesn't sound surprising at all. He's undergoing psychological tests today. One would have thought he was severely wounded by the police, but the wounds he received after being shot weren't that massive. So he is speaking to the police. He acted in a very, very eccentric way with them yesterday, and that is continuing. His wife, for example, his ex-wife, he's now divorced, she hasn't seen him for 4 months, had nothing to do with him for 4 months, so she was quite worried about him. She was thinking that he was turning into somebody with severe psychiatric problems. So that seems to be the real sort of line of inquiry now. And this idea that he was sleeping rough in Annecy and indeed hanging around children's playgrounds. He had been spotted at this children's playground quite a bit. And that, of course, is a huge cause for concern and something you would have thought the authorities would have picked up on, especially as he was technically due to be deported from France. His asylum claim had failed. And, of course, he was shouting out warped religious slogans. I would say warped because he was saying that he loved Jesus and that this was all in the name of Christianity. He is a Syrian Christian. But that kind of usurpation, I would say, of Christianity is something that suggests something not quite right with him, Mark.
Indeed. Now, as we speak to you, Peter, we've got the live picture at the park in Annecy with all these various cards and tributes and balloons and flowers. I think, as President Macron marked earlier, this is obviously a traumatic event for not just the families, but the whole country. He's due there in we think, about 20 minutes' time. But the focus now very much on those who've been directly affected. Do we know any more about the British family? Clearly, the little girl's been named as Etty, and we believe that they were on holiday here at this lakeside city.
Absolutely. It's a hugely popular tourist city, especially that lakeside area, always packed with tourists. Many, many British tourists, not just in the winter, because lots and lots go up for the skiing and stop off at Annecy or even stay in Annecy. But of course in the summer as well. It's a very beautiful city. And it sounds to me that Etty has the profile of a young child who was on a holiday with her, a summer holiday with her parents. I don't know that for certain, of course, but that sounds right. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about Etty and her family in the days and weeks ahead, Mark.
Yes, clearly they have to get her well, as I think the names then of two French cousins I have here, Ennio and Alba, who perhaps are rather more seriously hurt. I mean, we were hearing earlier from Elizabeth Bourne, the French Prime Minister, that they'd all undergone surgery and under constant medical surveillance, which I guess means they're still in intensive care, effectively.
Absolutely. I mean, the worst thing for Ennio and Alba was it sounds as though he attacked them first. And that was the kind of focus of his attack to begin with. One fascinating story that is emerging here, Mark, is that there was what we would call, the British would call a have-a-go hero. A young man turned up with a rucksack and really tried to put a stop to what was going on. An incredible video man. He's been identified as Henry. He's French. And he's a Christian pilgrim who was walking across France between lots of French cathedrals. So that's an absolutely fascinating story. But he is somebody who intervened. And to begin with, he scared the attacker off, Ennio and Alba. And he then tried to keep them away from other children as well. So that is
Peter, we're just
a hero.
Yeah, we're just showing those pictures again to people. He's the man with, I think he's been called the backpack hero by people, Henri, and clearly he was indicating that he had no other option but to intervene.
Absolutely. And the incredible part about Henri is that he is actually chasing the look at him. I mean, it's absolutely incredible pictures if you think about it, going right into the danger zone, risking death. I've seen him interviewed this morning, very mild-mannered, decent young man, devout Christian, and he felt that that was his vocation in life, that he was meant to be in there at that time to look after these children. Clearly, he didn't get there in time, perhaps, to stop everything that was going on. But again, this is one of these kind of credible stories that come out of this immense tragedy.
And to follow that up, I gather the cathedral there, they have this special mass due for later this afternoon, which I assume will be attended by hundreds, if not thousands.
Oh, it'll be absolutely packed. France is officially a secular nation, but it is also a huge Roman Catholic nation, of course. And Annecy has a very fine cathedral. And as you say, it will be packed to the rafters tonight. And all of these people will be coming together to think of these poor children and hoping, of course, that they pull through and that they're restored to how they were before this terrible event happened.
Peter, thank you very much indeed for updating us in France from Paris, of course, with the latest there. As we were indicating, we have President Macron due there in the next 15 minutes or so. Thank you very much indeed. But let's speak once more to Mark White, our Home Security Editor, who, of course, was following the story with me yesterday as the details were coming through. We've got a little bit more context now about what was going on, and we can see the reaction from those flowers and the cards and the balloons. And the fact that, you know, we've still got 4 youngsters still very ill, including this British youngster, Etty, we now have a name. I mean, do we expect that we'll get any more details, bearing in mind that I guess consular staff have got to get involved and so on?
I think inevitably there will be more details come out about this little girl and her family in the hours ahead. But encouraging, at least, that all of the very young children have gone through their surgery, have come out at the other end, but they are very sick, of course. They remain in intensive care, being managed by those specialist doctors, including, of course, doctors at this trauma centre over the Swiss border in Geneva.
Yeah, this is the 22-month-old Peter, I understand, is there. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, it's an appalling set of circumstances, and heartening, of course, that the French president and his wife have gone to visit and to talk with the families. But, of course, in tandem with that is the ongoing investigation into what exactly was the motivation for this man to carry out such a horrific attack. And it seems less and less likely that the finger is now being pointed at terrorism. It may have been some kind of psychological issue, although they've said no evidence of psychiatric problems. Having said that, we know that he's split from his wife. He has a young child of his own, and there was difficulties having moved to France, being effectively homeless in France and being denied asylum claims there because of the fact he'd been already granted asylum in Sweden.
And we think that may have actually been on Sunday, in terms of looking at the timeline as any possible triggers.
In terms of looking at possible triggers, it was very, very close to the point he launched the attack, just a matter of days.
Yeah, and the reason being because simply he'd been granted that status already in Sweden. We think maybe as far back as 10 years ago, a long time ago.
Yes, I mean, he'd been in the West since leaving Syria and then going to Turkey initially, but he'd been in the West for a decade. He'd married a Swedish woman, and as I say, he had been given refugee status in that country. So quite why he was then trying to claim asylum in France seems odd, unless it was a way of accessing benefits and accommodation in that particular country, because, of course, as I say, he was apparently homeless for the time that he was living in France.
Yeah, and of course, as we were reporting yesterday, had been seen in this park, sitting on a bench for some days.
For a number of days, yeah.
I mean, let's reflect. We had Rishi Sunak, of course, in Washington last night saying the attack was unfathomable. all our thoughts are with those who are affected, including the British child and their families. I've been in touch with President Macron. He said last night, we stand ready to offer any assistance that we can. We assume that will be reciprocal in terms of the consular staff trying to help this family out there at the moment.
Yes, so the consular staff are there and in not just in touch, but providing, constant support to the family, as you would imagine in this kind of situation, helped by the fact there is only one British victim, so they can concentrate on that particular family. But there are the issues that will have to be explored after this, and one of the issues is around, how well managed are asylum seekers when they come to Western countries like the UK and like France. No one really knows.
And the fact he was on the streets for months, as we now know.
And no one really knows, especially when you're coming from a war-torn country like Syria, what individual people may have experienced in that country that may have traumatised them in some way. There is also an issue, Mark, and it has to be addressed, where asylum seekers that have been turned down for asylum have gone on to commit some pretty horrible crimes in this country. An asylum seeker who was turned down for asylum then went on to blow himself up, luckily no one else, at the Liverpool maternity hospital, you remember, a couple of years back. Also another asylum seeker, again turned down and in the process of being deported from the country, set off a bomb which luckily didn't fully detonate on a tube train at Parsons Green. So there are examples that do need to be explored in terms of how we manage people and how we look into the background of individuals.
And trying to work out what their reaction will be.
Not just to assess the threat that an individual might possess, but also to determine what support services they might need.
Their state of mind and so on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mark, thank you for that. As we say, we are expecting President Macron there in about 10 minutes or so. We'll update you as we get those pictures. Also coming up, the former UK ambassador to the United States to discuss that Atlantic Declaration. What exactly has been declared? Finding that out shortly.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, President Biden has described US-UK ties as being in real good shape following those face-to-face talks with Rishi Sunak at the White House yesterday evening. The pair signing what's been called the Atlantic Declaration, including commitments to ease trade barriers, forge closer defence industry ties and agree a data protection deal. Well, let's speak now to the former UK ambassador to the US, Lord Kim Darroch, who can join us. Lord Darroch, thank you very much for your time. An Atlantic Declaration, but not a free trade deal as advertised in the 2019 Tory manifesto, we remember.
That's right, Mark. And I have to say, when I first saw the news of this Atlantic Declaration, I looked at the detail and I found it very difficult to actually grasp exactly what it is. So I looked on the government website this morning, and there's about 20 points in it, and there's collaboration on everything you can imagine, from civil nuclear through defence, through AI, through emerging technologies, all this sort of stuff. The only thing in it that really, I think, can be said immediately to help British exports to America is we're going to start negotiations on what they call a critical minerals agreement, which is basically about getting British electric cars into America with the same subsidies that others will enjoy, including Japanese cars and deal they've done. So that's something. But this feels to me overall like putting together a package with quite a grand title, because there isn't a free trade deal on offer, and this is the best alternative they can put together.
And in terms of that issue of electric cars and green issues and so on, this is, we assume, because of the Inflation Reduction Bill, where the States has given, I think, $369 billion in subsidies. And, you know, it's a bit difficult raising that with the President saying, well, perhaps can we have a share of your cake?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is quite a popular and very big piece of legislation in the earth, $370 billion, quite a lot of money. But it has some really quite strong protectionist elements in it. And, you know, I think one could say to them, well, you need to give us exceptions or wind some of this back, whatever. That's not going to work. So the best thing you can do, which is what the Prime Minister was trying to do yesterday, is try and get a cut of the action for British companies that are either invested in America or selling a lot of stuff to America. And that's what these negotiations will be about.
Yeah. Just looking at the language then used, interesting that President Biden reiterated that phrase, special relationship, but Sunak went for something rather different, an indispensable alliance.
Yeah. Well, look, special relationship, I always felt, had a slightly needy tone to it. And so I have no problem with the Prime Minister going for different language. The Americans always roll it up when the British Prime Minister is in town, because it harks back to the height of our collaboration in the Second World War and Winston Churchill, that sort of stuff. So that's fair enough too. I mean, let's be in no doubt, the defence, security and intelligence relationship is as strong as ever and as important as ever. But I think this is an effort to add some economic substance to the relationship.
And what did you make then of the body language? I mean, some newspaper correspondents have been rather unkind, comparing it to a young nephew visiting the distant elderly relative abroad.
Well, I mean, the reality is, Mark, there is quite an age differential between them, and you can't escape that. I think they get on fine. I don't think we're at the heights of Thatcher and Reagan, or Bush and Blair, or Clinton and Blair. But nor are we at the depths, if you go back in history, to say Nixon and Heath or LBJ and Harold Wilson. So we're somewhere in the middle. And look, I think there's never been a bigger age disparity between a British Prime Minister and an American President, but I think the personal relationship is fine.
While you're with us, if you don't mind, Lord Darragh, I'll maybe address another Atlantic declaration from a certain former president, of course, Donald Trump, saying, I am innocent. A dark day for America, he said. Now facing 7 charges, this time federal charges. This is a bit of a game changer this time round.
Look, it's very serious, Mark. There's no question. It looks also a slam dunk because there's no question but there were some 150, some of them extraordinarily highly classified documents down at Mar-a-Lago. Of course, it's also likely a political touch paper because it's a Democratic administration. It's a Justice Department which has done this under a Democrat Attorney General. So it's not... It's an obvious retort for Donald Trump to say this is all political. Actually, I don't think it is political in the sense that there's no question that the documents were there and that they shouldn't have been there. But this is going to spark off another round of pretty partisan politics. And I see already Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, has piled in support of Trump. So I suppose we should expect Donald Trump's opinion ratings to go up again.
And, of course, the fascinating fallout, therefore, for the presidential race as well and what that means. We shall see in the weeks and months to come. Lord Kim Darragh, thank you very much indeed for your time here on GB News. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, pleasure.
Just to remind you, back to Annecy as soon as we see President Macron. But let's get the latest headlines now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 12:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. French President Emmanuel Macron has visited an injured British toddler and her family in hospital. 3-year-old Etty was one of 4 toddlers stabbed yesterday in the French Alps. She's now said to be in a stable condition. The knifeman, a Syrian refugee, had been denied asylum in the country just days before the attack. The French Interior Minister says the claim was refused because the 31-year-old had already been granted asylum in Sweden 10 years ago. Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted on charges of retaining classified documents at his Florida estate. A source close to the case says he faces 7 charges. This is the second time Trump has been indicted. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges on a federal level. A teenage boy who died after being followed by police on his e-bike and then collided with an ambulance has been named locally as Saul Cookson. Greater Manchester Police said traffic officers had been following the 15-year-old yesterday in Salford until their car was blocked by bollards. The force said the collision between the bike and ambulance happened a short time later. The incident has been referred to a police watchdog. A heat health alert has been raised from yellow to amber in eastern and southern England, as well as the Midlands, ahead of the weekend. The alert issued by the UK Health Security Agency is already in place and lasts until Monday morning. It warns that high temperatures of up to 28 degrees Celsius could affect people's health. And make sure you get your brollies ready, though. We're being warned of thunderstorms too. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to GB News Live. So, the French President Emmanuel Macron is due to visit Annecy Park shortly. 12:30 was the time we were told, but clearly he will be meeting various civic leaders and getting an update from emergency workers, having been at the University Hospital in Grenoble about an hour and a half away to meet the British family of one of the victims, 3-year-old, and indications of Etty that she is in a stable condition. That's the latest after the President visited earlier. And you can see the playground here now with other youngsters bringing their own little toys, and a little soft toy being placed there by that little girl with flowers and various messages and cards as the city tries to come to terms with what has happened yesterday with, we're being told, this special mass now at the cathedral a little later this evening for those to gather there. Another stroller you can see in the background with families returning, and the park once more a place for families to reflect on the news coming through. Mark is still with us here in the studio, having followed the story with me yesterday. We assume that Macron will try to meet as many people there as possible to share in this, but already indicating when he visited staff in Grenoble about the shock that's being felt across the country.
Yes, he'll want to be there, to be seen, to be in touch with the community in that beautiful alpine town. I mean, this is an image that we've seen so many times over the years, Mark, of these makeshift shrines. Fortunately, on this occasion, and so far at least, no one has died as a result of the horrific events.
But a very important process for people, as you say. It's such a common theme, and they feel that they can share with the other families and the little toddlers, and you can see moments of reflection and thoughts going on as they arrive there.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually quite bizarre to when yesterday afternoon into the evening, the park was sort of reopened. You would never get that in the UK. This whole area would be a crime scene for days. But it was reopened really quite quickly. And there were children in that park playing, and it just seemed a little odd, just looking at that spectacle. Today, it's kind of more traditionally what you would expect at the scene of a horrific event like this, just an opportunity for people in that area, and there will be local people, but there'll be many tourists as well, because remember yesterday, tourists were caught up in this, including the little British girl, a Dutch family as well, caught up in this, as you know, is understandable in this. What you can only really term as a tourist honeypot. I've never been there myself, but was
I have visited several times. I have to say, I think for many British families, it's on the sort of route if you're heading to go down to the Alps before you climb up into the mountains. You can have a sort of lakeside visit, some very nice cafes and restaurants, and you know, if you've got the kids with you, they can walk around the parks and around the lake and so on. It's a huge family venue.
Well, you're not alone. Quite a number of people within our newsroom have said likewise that they've been there and they were struck by just how idyllic it is. And of course, right on that boating lake is where this park is situated. And we saw the images yesterday of this attacker after launching this knife attack within the child's playground itself, running out into the park by the boating lake. Absolutely shocking images.
Yeah, the alleged crime now, we have been told by the Interior Ministry, is attempted murder, but growing indications about his state of mind and the fact that he was effectively homeless for several months. Is there in France a similar situation as we have here in the UK, where diminished responsibility can come into play in terms of any criminal process?
Yes, absolutely, depending on an individual's mental state. And we don't know, just because there was no record of any kind of psychiatric issues, you don't know what underlying trauma there may have been from some time in the past, or indeed from whatever he's gone through in his life. No excuse, of course, for what he has done in the most horrific of ways. You can't, you know, let's not belittle or, you know, try to make any kind of excuses for what this man has done. He has been seen by psychiatrists within that policing setting, as he is in custody at the moment, as they determine exactly, you know, how fit he is to continue being questioned by those law enforcement officials.
Indeed. Now, I'm just going to share something that's coming in from Press Association, just to give you a flavour of how people are feeling there. This is actually a British mother of two who lives in Annecy, who's spoken to Press Association in tears because her son had asked to visit the park, her son Rudy, 5 years old, on the day of the attack yesterday. She'd been speaking to reporters at the park and she said, "We locally call this the pirate playground because it has a pirate ship in it. It's a place our kids know and love. It was my son's 5th birthday yesterday. He'd mentioned he would be interested in going to the pirate place as school, a local treasure, which is why it's so shocking. I don't know anyone who hasn't visited the pirate playground." And obviously her shock, the fact that she could have been there with her son. She'd moved, she told reporters, to southeast France from London 3 years ago with her husband and son Rudy, 5, and 9-month-old Vinny. So it's, you know, another indication about how people have been here with their children enjoying life, and suddenly this erupts yesterday.
I think one of the most, I mean, obviously the stabbing spree itself was absolutely horrific, but one of the most chilling aspects to contemplate as we were watching the images yesterday of this man inside the playground is that, you know, you have to go out of your way to get into that playground. It's behind a small wall and through a gate. You know, he'd not just happened across individuals within, including children, within the park. He'd gone out of his way to target small children in the playground.
And that question of intent, of course, comes into play then in terms of the criminal charges and whether it's pre-planned and all those various issues. As we show these pictures again, I mean, the other issue, of course, is this bystander. There you can see with the backpack, now known as Henri.
Yeah, well, interestingly, we've been hearing from Henri, who has been talking to the press out there. He said of his very heroic actions. At times like that, you do whatever you can with whatever you've got. And for him, what he had was his backpack, Mark. He said many other people intervened in whatever way they could. I saw a park employee try to hit the attacker with his big plastic spade. He then goes on to say, I acted like any French person would. If there is any lesson to be learned from my experience, it's that anything is possible if you stop being passive in the face of attacks of this kind. I think that's a very important point, because you'll often see now, understandably, people running away in the face.
Well, we're told to, aren't we?
Well,
in terms
indeed,
of major public security alerts.
Absolutely, by the authorities saying, you know, we don't want have-a-go heroes, but actually have-a-go heroes make often all the difference in the minutes before those paid heroes, those police officers who are paid to deal with this kind of event, actually arrive on scene. And
the Narville Tusk on the bridge, we remember, in another terrorist incident.
It can be people like Henri who are there, who can act, who can hopefully save other people's lives.
And I think I'm right in saying that Henri is a self-confessed Christian. He was on some kind of pilgrimage at the time, which he's continuing. He's gone on with his backpack to continue that. And, of course, that this man was a Christian, or at least a declared Christian in Syria.
Yes. Now, what we don't know really is whether this individual was a part of the 10% of Syrians who are Christians, I think it's Coptic Christians, or whether he has, like so many asylum seekers in a bid to strengthen their asylum claim, converted from Islam perhaps to Christianity. I see this, it's not to indicate that this is what this individual has done, but to acknowledge, Mark, that this is an issue with a very significant number of asylum seekers in this country and beyond who, as part of their strategy, if you like, to try to ensure that their case is strengthened for asylum, do say that they've converted. Therefore, if you return me to my home country, I will be branded.
No indication of that being.
Well, we don't know, but you know,
something they'll be looking at for clear reasons.
Only 10% of the Syrian population are Christian.
And I think, obviously, this was the moment of the minute's silence yesterday in the National Assembly, the Parliament, effectively acknowledging what had gone on, and we've got this moment later in the cathedral, because we've been calling it a town. I think it is actually a city because of the fact of the cathedral being there in Annecy. So this will be a second moment for the country to come together, and one wonders whether, as we've just been reading about Katie Jackson there in Annecy, whether some Brit expats and maybe those on holiday will be joining that occasion as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in that town at the moment, it's going to...
this is the playground now. We've got some more shots of it, which have just come in. Not live. These were sort of recorded. As we were saying, Katie Jackson, this mum who said her 5-year-old had wanted to go to the park yesterday, showing why it is such a popular location for these youngsters.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it is it's a beautiful little play park within an amazingly beautiful and idyllic setting there. You can absolutely understand why tourists that are in that town would want to go to that particular play park, and that's probably why so many people are familiar with the play park. If they've got youngsters, they will have been in that area.
That's the little
themselves.
Pirate ship there, that wooden structure behind that.
Yeah, we actually saw a man who was on top.
That's where the stroller was, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was a man on top of that particular structure, whether he climbed up there to get away from the attacker or where he'd been up there with a child or not, I don't know. But we saw him in the video, that same harrowing sequence where that poor mother was putting herself between the attacker and her young child.
Now, I hadn't followed, I hadn't realised what Henri was saying about the park attendant who had tried to intervene. You were just saying that he'd been using, part of the sort of tools that he had for the...
Yeah, it was a plastic spade that he'd used to clobber the attacker at one point to try and fend him off and push him out of the area around the playground. And then the others, including Henri, who gave pursuit to this individual. We, of course, had the former Liverpool footballer, Letalic, who was actually in the park. He had been running at the time and filmed that sequence of the immediate aftermath when the police caught up with this man and tackled him to the ground. He seemed to indicate that the stabbing of the two adults actually took place outside the playground when this individual was running away.
76-year-old who was hurt.
78-year-old man.
Sorry,
and some indication, actually, that this 78-year-old man may have been shot by the police in the confusion. Certainly, there's other video that I've seen that shows you hear a gunfire and someone drops to the floor who is not the attacker.
So it's a stray shot.
Then you see the police on the attacker. That's horrible, tragic. It's understandable, though, in the confusion of a situation like that when you've got a group of people, because, of course, he was going up to these elderly people and stabbing them.
Yeah, we'll try and get an update, actually, on his condition. It's a good point, isn't it? Anthony Letelic, of course, that former Liverpool football player, having recorded that on his phone. Well, we're just awaiting President Macron to arrive here in Annecy, due imminently. We'll be back with that live and follow all the events here at this French lakeside town and keep you updated here on GB News Live.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's keep you updated on the position in France. This is the picture here at Annecy in the lakeside city. Everyone has been moved back from this park here because we are expecting President Macron, the French president, imminently with his wife, the First Lady Brigitte. They have been visiting the British family of this young toddler who's being treated at Grenoble, about an hour and a half away from Annecy, in terms of the lake here. Etty, we're being told, 3-year-old in a stable condition. Her family have not been named as yet, but also the fact that the president met 2 children, French children, 2 cousins, Ennio and Alba. They're still in intensive care, critical but stable. So clearly there's much medical intervention still going on. And then elsewhere in Geneva, across the lake, where the air ambulance took the 22-month-old Dutch baby, Peter. We have no update on that, but we are being told all children have been operated on in terms of the care that's being given to them. But the president now on his way back to Annecy to meet the many people, including families here who have gathered. You can see the flowers, the balloons, the cards, the various messages, and this very telling conversation that a British mother to Katie Jackson, who lives in Annecy, has had with reporters a little earlier. She was in tears, reporter said, that her 5-year-old son had asked to visit this park yesterday, the day of the attack. Her son, Rudy, who's 5, it was his 5th birthday yesterday, she said. And locally, we call this the pirate playground, said Katie, because it has the pirate ship in it. It's a place our kids know and love. It was my son's 5th birthday yesterday. He'd mentioned he would be interested in going to the pirate place as at school, but this is a local treasure, and this is why it's so shocking. I don't know anyone who hasn't visited this, the pirate playground. Well, you can see that underlined there with a number of people who've gone to share their thoughts today, and the thoughts, of course, of the 4 children being attended to. As Mark was also updating us, the 78-year-old who was very badly hurt, not just being stabbed several times, but receiving a shot, a stray shot, as police tried to get to the assailant at this lakeside city. And Mark, an indication perhaps that President Macron, as well as getting this medical update, will be speaking to the Interior Ministry, all the various officials, to find out the latest on the, well, what is a criminal investigation now.
Yeah, and he may well want to speak to some of those who were there at the time, maybe some of the have-a-go heroes like Henri, who we know was on a pilgrimage in the area. Say he's been speaking, Mark, to the members of the French press out there, and he seems like quite a colourful character in terms of what he was saying.
And he's the person that we saw in that footage here, as we can see, in the background there with the backpack. He's been called the backpack hero.
Yeah, absolutely. He said it was God's will that he was there and able to intervene. He said, all I know is that I was not there by chance. On my journey to the cathedrals, I crossed paths with this man and have acted instinctively. It was unthinkable, he said, to do nothing. The philosophy and management student is continuing, as I say, in some of the things, his comments to the press.
And he's continuing with this sort of his pilgrimage to these various cathedrals. He's not being put off that particular duty as he sees it. And just to mention, of course, that Annecy, the cathedral later will be holding this special mass for people to share in that particular event.
Yeah, I mean, he might well be there if he's not continued on his pilgrimage. I say he's a devout Catholic who said it was a strong force inside him pushing him to act.
And just to reiterate that Brigitte, the First Lady, will be with President Macron, having visited the University Hospital in Grenoble to get an update. So it's rather more than just the state visit. This is the first family visiting.
Well, absolutely, and it is a key function, really, of your head of state in times of, you know, national issues such as this, for the head of state and the First Lady, of course, to be there, to be seen, to be with the people, to be comforting those affected by this. and as I say, just really to show that they care.
These are the live shots from the lakeside park there with many parents and families. More flowers, as you can see, being laid at the scene. You're watching GB News Live. It's 1 o'clock. We'll update you with the French president due here shortly. But first, let's get an update on all the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. French President Emmanuel Macron has visited an injured British toddler and her family in hospital. 3-year-old Etty was one of 4 toddlers stabbed yesterday in the French Alps. She's now said to be in a stable condition. The knifeman, a Syrian refugee, had been denied asylum in the country just days before the attack. In the city of Annecy, the French Interior Minister says the claim was refused because the 31-year-old had already been granted asylum in Sweden 10 years ago. All 4 toddlers injured in yesterday's attack have now undergone surgery. 2 are still understood to be in a critical condition. 2 adults were also injured. One of them was 78-year-old Yusuf.
I was sat on the bench. Suddenly, he stood in front of me and tried to stab me with his knife, and I made a movement with my left arm to try and avoid the blow. Fortunately, I was only injured slightly. He was being followed by civilians, so he ran away to the left. He attacked other people, I think, and was caught by the police.
Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted on charges of retaining classified documents at his Florida estate. A source close to the case says he faces 7 charges. This is the second time Trump has been indicted. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Posting on his social media platform, Trump has accused the government of election interference. He's campaigning to make a return to the White House in 2024.
Our country is going to hell, and they come after Donald Trump, weaponizing the Justice Department, weaponizing the FBI. We can't let this continue to go on because it's ripping our country to shreds. We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them. It's a hoax.
The former chair of ITV has told GB News he's confident the broadcaster has handled the Philip Schofield scandal appropriately. The former This Morning host quit ITV after admitting to an affair with a much younger male colleague on the programme. The broadcaster is undergoing an external review. Archie Norman recalled how, in his experience, Mr Schofield and Holly Willoughby always behaved professionally. He also told us he thinks the current ITV chief executive is handling it well.
On the whole, the process and practices are very good. Looking after people and making sure things are done properly, because you have to be in a media type of business. But workplace relationships do occur, and you can't just assume because they occur that the employer is somehow, in some way, at fault. I don't know what's going to come out of the inquiry. My guess is that we'll find that ITV have handled it pretty well. I'd be disappointed otherwise.
A 16-year-old boy has been arrested after 2 students were seriously injured at a private school in Devon. Police were called to Blundell School in Tiverton at around 1 this morning. 3 people, including 2 students, had been assaulted and sustained multiple serious injuries. A teenager has been arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent, and he remains in police custody. A teenage boy who died after being followed by police on his e-bike and then collided with an ambulance has been named locally as Saul Cookson. Greater Manchester Police said traffic officers had been following the 15-year-old yesterday in Salford until their car was blocked off by bollards. The force said the collision between the bike and ambulance happened a short time later. The incident has been referred to a police watchdog. The Prime Minister says President Joe Biden's experience on China and foreign policy is particularly valuable after signing a new economic partnership with the US. The new Atlantic Declaration includes commitments on easing trade barriers, closer defence industry ties and a data protection deal. Rishi Sunak's called the relationship with the US an indispensable alliance. The government's announced plans to suspend the windfall tax on oil and gas companies if prices fall to normal levels for a sustained period. Currently, a 75% tax rate is imposed on oil and gas firms. This would be reduced to 40%. The windfall tax was introduced last year to help fund a scheme to lower energy bills for households and businesses. And Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has abandoned Labour's commitment to spending £28 billion a year on a green prosperity plan. Instead, she says the party will gradually increase spending over the course of Parliament. Ms Reeves explained economic circumstances have changed since the announcement 2 years ago, saying Labour now wants to commit to spending only what's needed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Mark with GB News Live.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's bring you up to speed with the events here at Arcia in the park here at the lakeside with more and more flowers and cards being laid. As we were telling you, the French President Emmanuel Macron is due here. It is now a little behind schedule. We do have confirmation that the President will meet Henri, that we were speaking about, the so-called backpack hero that chased the attacker away from the park, and he is being hailed quite rightly as a hero across France. He is a Catholic who was on a pilgrimage to the cathedral there at Annecy, and he has tried to continue with that, but for obvious reasons, the French president has asked to meet him and to have a conversation, so that may well be going on at the moment away from public gaze. But the president is due at this park with many various messages and wishes, good wishes to the kids that have been affected. To update you, of course, Etty, the 3-year-old British child in a stable condition. 2 French cousins, Ennio and Alba, slightly worse condition, but still stable in intensive care. And then the 22-month-old baby, Peter, the Dutch baby, currently being treated in Geneva. But we'll update you as we get more and bring you the French president's visit imminently. But let's update you with some other news now that's been happening, with that report of a teenager being killed after being followed on his e-bike by police in Salford last night. They'd been pursuing the 15-year-old, but then forced to halt because of bollards in the way. The boy is said to have proceeded down another road, but then collided with a stationary ambulance while the crew were attending, brought him to hospital, but he subsequently died there. Now, the Independent Office for Police Conduct is launching an investigation to find out the timeline and, in fact, what happened with, as you can see, more flowers and tributes and photos being laid here at Salford. Let's bring in our news reporter, Jack Carson, who's there for us. And Jack, yet more moments of reflection for people on an awful story involving youngsters, of course.
Yeah, lots of tributes being laid here all morning, Mark. Visits from the family, visits from close friends as well. There's a piece of cloth that's been hung on the fence next to where people are laying flowers and people are writing messages, of course, wishing rest in peace, talking how much they're going to miss who's been named locally as 15-year-old Sal Cookson. He was involved in that incident. Greater Manchester Police confirmed that traffic officers were following Sol on his e-bike, eventually down here where I am now on Lower Seedley Road. Then these bollards here is the furthest the police could follow him. It's then when Sol turned right, he collided with an ambulance. Now, we have had confirmation from the North West Ambulance Service that ambulance wasn't stationary, it was moving, it was on its way back to its ambulance station. But then after the collision, the paramedics within that ambulance got out and immediately attended to Sol and tried to treat his injuries. He was then taken to hospital, where unfortunately he did pass away. Now, a local resident here, Wesley Hainig, spoke to us a little bit earlier on. He witnessed the incident.
I stood at my friend's house over there. I've seen a Range Rover coming down here very fast. And I thought, why is that coming down so fastly? And I looked, and my son, who's, God bless the young man, is his friend, He said, can you see that in front of you? I said, no, I can't. And it was rapid. It went dead fast. And he went round there and the ambulance hit him. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, boom, I heard the noise, you know what I mean? Then police made him drive round there that fast. And I witnessed that. And I heard the noise, I knew there was something really bad, you know what I mean? Okay, yeah, my son was crying his eyes out. He's a good little friend.
Yeah, as you can hear from that, a lot of anger within the community here at how this boy has come to die. And of course, it comes on the day that Andy Cook, who's the chief inspector of the constabulary, has warned of the lack of public trust in policing. Not only with the drop in charges, two-thirds less charges since 2014. And of course, Labour of Yvette Cooper, she's called it totally dysfunctional. Of course, Suella Braverman's been referring to of course her want to return to common sense policing. But here in Salford, those tributes being laid, a funding page has also been set up. Nearly £2,000 has been raised for the funeral, and the community coming together to mourn their loss.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, in terms of the police investigation, there is now this inquiry from the Independent Office for Police Conduct underway.
Yeah, the Greater Manchester Police did refer themselves to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. They have been here, as well as further up the streets here where the incident actually occurred, investigating, not only, of course, taking their own evidence, but also they will be keeping an eye on how the police proceedings after this incident and their own investigation takes place, to make sure that obviously there was no wrongdoing, and also, of course, to get proper answers, as much as the community want here, of why that police and those traffic officers were following what sounds to be quite closely the young boy.
Jack in Salford, thank you for updating us. More, of course, from there as we get the details released. Thank you very much indeed. But clearly now a rather different narrative in terms of the involvement there of the ambulance. Well, let's return now to France, just to indicate we are awaiting the French president arriving at the lakeside city of Annecy to meet the people still laying flowers and various tributes there at the park. He has been with his wife, the First Lady Brigitte, at Grenoble University Hospital to meet the British family of one of the youngsters who has been hurt or stabbed. That's Etty, the 3-year-old, and also the 2 French cousins, Ennio and Alba, while Peter, the 22-month-old Dutch baby, is in Geneva. But I think we can now speak to Times France correspondent David Chazan, who's actually there near the park. And David, we are awaiting the president. An indication, I think, that he is also trying to speak to Henri, the so-called backpack hero who we've seen involved in the chase of the attacker.
Absolutely. What we think is happening is that Mr. Macron is going to meet Henri, who used his backpack to ward off the attacker, certainly stopped him from hurting more people than he otherwise would have done. And then President Macron is due to come here. I'm in the playground where the attack happened. Just behind me, you can probably see floral tributes. Dozens of local people have been here since yesterday to lay flowers just in support of the 4 children and the 2 men who were stabbed by the attacker yesterday.
And very poignant reflection from a British mum or two, Katie Jackson, who now lives in Annecy, in tears, saying that her son, on his 5th birthday yesterday, wanted to go to the park to actually celebrate his birthday. There may be many other mums and dads there with their children thinking, well, perhaps we were very lucky to be not there at the time. It's going to touch a lot of people.
I think that's certainly true. This is a picture postcard tourist town on the shores of Lake Annecy. It attracts thousands and thousands of tourists every year, including many British families. And people here are not used to stuff like this. This is a prosperous place, a peaceful place, and a lot of people are finding it hard to come to terms with the fact that this happened here. But they're also showing a degree of resilience because, perhaps surprisingly, This playground was reopened only hours after the attack yesterday, and families did bring their children here, saying that their way of showing that they would not be beaten by this kind of violence was to carry on as normal, to use the playground and to show that they would not be intimidated.
And I think a further reflection of that later, where we've got this special service or a special mass at the cathedral.
Yes, that's right. So that will happen, we think, in a few hours from now. And I think there'll be a very large turnout because this really has touched almost everyone who lives here. People have been telling me how upset they are, how they found it difficult just to really comprehend what was in this man's head. How does somebody get the idea of stabbing small children? The oldest was 3 years old, the British girl. It's incredibly difficult to cope with. The authorities have set up a counselling unit for people who feel that they need support. But yeah, this will cast a long shadow over Annecy, probably for years to come.
And we have President Macron visiting shortly with the First Lady, of course, Brigitte, in terms of this not being, I guess, a state occasion or a state visit. He's going to want to try and speak to as many people and share in this very raw emotion there.
Yes, I think so. He's been meeting local people, including, as you were just saying, one of the young men, a 24-year-old business graduate who bravely took on the attacker. And I think he's just going to want to show, he's going to want to be seen that he is here, that he is offering support to this town. And of course, he was meeting earlier with the family of the 3-year-old British girl who's been named as Etty.
And Dave, just very quickly then, in terms of the criminal investigation, I mean, it's obviously been described as attempted murder. Clearly, there are questions about this man's mental state. We now learn that he had his application for asylum turned down on Sunday, but has been in the parks, seen sitting on this bench and effectively homeless, we think, in Annecy for quite some time.
Yeah, that's right. He's been wandering around, and it seems that he's been spending a lot of his days just whiling away time at a local shopping centre about 100 yards from where I'm standing now. And I spoke to people there who said that they'd spotted him repeatedly, and they said he never seemed threatening. He just used to sit there, often on his phone, often making video calls, but they said there was something about his demeanour that they found troubling, and they didn't feel comfortable getting too close. Now, we've been hearing today from police sources about his ongoing questioning by police, and it seems that he's not cooperating at all. He refused to give them his mobile phone PIN number, and he's refused to talk, really. At times he's just spoken Arabic. At other times we've heard he's actually rolled around on the floor screaming in English, "I should be dead, kill me," or words to that effect. And so the police have had him examined by a psychiatrist. In France, if somebody is deemed not to be responsible for their own actions, they would normally be transferred out of police custody to a psychiatric ward. That has not happened, and he is still in police custody. So we think that the psychiatrist must have deemed that he is fit to continue to be questioned. And the French police... Sorry, carry on.
Yes, I was going to say, and in terms of that aspect, the criminal investigation as such then continues.
It certainly does, and the French police are also talking to their Swedish counterparts, because this is a man who spent a lot of time in Sweden. He has an ex-wife there with whom he has a 3-year-old daughter. She's been speaking to French media, saying that she's very shocked that he's done this. She didn't believe he was capable of anything like this. She says he left Sweden after his application for citizenship was rejected there, but he still had political asylum, so he was classified as a political refugee. Now, the French police are talking to the Swedish police, trying to trace his movements, trying to work out who he may have been in touch with. But for the time being, French investigators say there's no reason to suspect that the motive was terrorism.
David, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at the scene. Of course, back to that lakeside park as soon as we see the President. But for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's update you on what's been happening in Washington overnight and what's about to happen in Doncaster a little later. President Biden describing US-UK ties as being in real good shape following face-to-face talks with Rishi Sunak at the White House last night, the pair signing the Atlantic Declaration. Well, that includes commitments to ease trade barriers, forge closer defence industry ties and agree a data protection deal. Let's speak now to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's in Doncaster. The reason being, Tom, he's got a whirlwind diplomacy trip from Washington to Doncaster. Explain why he's going to be there.
Yes, from DC to Doncaster, it's a veritable global tour from the Prime Minister over the last few days. We're here in Doncaster today because this is where the Northern Research Group of Conservative MPs are holding their annual conference. And Rishi Sunak, himself being an MP with a northern seat, will be giving the keynote address a little bit later today. Interestingly, it was this time last year when the last Northern Research Group conference was being held that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was meant to give that keynote speech, but instead he took a surprise trip to Ukraine, which was noted upon by many people at the time and questioned as to whether or not that was the former Prime Minister skirting with what could have been parliamentary criticism at the height of the Partygate drama. But here today in Doncaster, the Prime Minister will be talking about the sort of levelling up agenda, or some words that are being used perhaps for the first time in a little while here at this conference, the Northern Powerhouse. Remember that?
Yes.
Sort of George Osborne's legacy back from 2016. We're hearing a lot of that today, lots of talk about devolution and the rest of it. But of course, the Prime Minister will be returning from what is widely regarded as a relatively successful US trip, the fourth time that the Prime Minister has met the US President in around as many months. This is a relationship that Number 10 and indeed the White House have in recent days both been at pains to stress is a close one. And whilst this new Atlantic Declaration falls short of being a fully fledged free trade agreement, what it is a closening of these two countries militarily and economically, smoothing out some of those trade issues, making sort of side deals in various sectors, and crucially, making sure that British military hardware is treated by Americans in the same way that American military hardware is. We could describe it in some ways as mini trade deals rather than a comprehensive FTA.
And on that very topic, of course, bearing in mind that it was the 2019 Tory manifesto pledge of a free trade deal with the United States and others as one of those prizes from Brexit, will there be questions there on yet another broken manifesto pledge?
Well, there certainly will be. And of course, the previous president of the United States, Donald Trump, used to talk up the idea of getting a deal done quickly with the United Kingdom, a fully fledged free trade agreement with the United Kingdom with our new independent trade policy. Of course, as a member of the European Union, you're forbidden from casting independent trade deals with other countries because you're sort of kept within the European Union's common external tariff. Of course, it would be up to, it's not just one country that can demand a free trade deal. Both sides have to agree. That's how deals ordinarily work. And it does seem that this president, this new president of the United States, sees that sort of deal as a much lower priority. So it has not been something that ever since Joe Biden became the US president, it's not been something that a series of prime ministers, from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak, none of them have been describing it as a priority in the way that it was talked about back when Donald Trump was president.
And talking of priorities, of course, away from that international focus, this is, as you say, the Northern Research Group. Will there be a sort of assessment assessment of how robust that red wall situation is, as, of course, the polls indicate Labour is picking up support.
Certainly, and it's been fascinating to speak to and hear from many influential MPs and indeed even some former MPs. I've spoken to people like Ben Houchen, the mayor of the Tees Valley, and indeed George Osborne, the guy who came up with that northern powerhouse idea as well. Now, the mood here is an interesting one. This doesn't feel like it's a sort of factional fight in the way that perhaps previous conferences like this have been described. This feels much more like a policy forum, people talking about ideas, recognising that the Conservative Party is fairly far behind in the polls, but repeatedly what I've heard about is the idea that the Labour Party's lead can be caught up with if the Conservative Party sees energy, and energy from perhaps new ideas being discussed here.
Tom, for the moment, thank you. Back to Doncaster, of course, as we hear from the Prime Minister. And also back to France imminently, of course, because President Macron is due there at that park where more flowers, more tributes being laid. We'll have the latest for you live here on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on the position in France where the French President Emmanuel Macron and the First Lady Brigitte is expected imminently here at the park, where a huge number of flowers and cards and balloons are now being laid by people in their thoughts for those 4 children hurt. Mark White is with us in the studio once more following these events. Mark, we're just getting confirmation that the President is in Annecy, but he's visiting the hospital where one of the adults injured is being treated.
Yes, so those that have been injured as a result of this attack are being treated in 3 different locations. There is a 22-year-old child, the youngest.
22-month-old.
22-month-old, sorry, child, the youngest victim, is being treated in Switzerland in Geneva. The 3 other children are being treated in Grenoble, but there is a man still in hospital in Annecy who is being visited now. Whether this is the 78-year-old, we're not quite sure. It may well be, because the indication was that the other adult of the 2 adults that were injured was less seriously injured.
Minor injuries,
so they may well have been released by now.
And just to reiterate, that 78-year-old not just being stabbed several times, but received what seems to be a stray bullet from the police when they were trying to take the assailant.
Well, certainly there are reports indicating that may well have happened. And there's video that I've seen that shows the moment where this attacker is being pursued. There's what sounds like a shot ringing out and an individual falling down, but that's not the attacker. Then the attacker is jumped on by the police officers just a fraction of a second later. Yeah. So it may well be that indeed that elderly man who'd been stabbed by the attacker may have also received a stray bullet.
Now, the other thing that we know that the President will be doing is meeting Henri, who we've just seen in the background of the pictures of this, the aftermath of the attack, with his backpack, so-called the backpack hero. The President asking to meet him. And we're told, there he is there in the background, that he was on a pilgrimage, a committed Christian, a Catholic who was wanting to visit the cathedral there at the lakeside.
Yes, and he said he just felt compelled to help, that he couldn't do anything else. He says, I let myself be guided by Providence and by the Virgin Mary. I said my adieu. They would decide, he said, what would happen next. He said, we tried...
You can still see the knife in the man's hand here as he's chasing him. So.
Yes. And he said, we tried to scare him and make it clear that he wouldn't get what he wanted. But he also said that other people joined in. It wasn't just him. He said that there was a park attendant as well who apparently hit the attacker with a plastic spade at one point as well. So people did intervene. Although the instinct might be to run away.
Well, in fact, as we were reflecting earlier, is perhaps what we're told to do in circumstances of mass attacks and so on. Now, interesting that we were speaking to David Shazan, who's on the scene there, reporting from the authorities, who basically are continuing, we're told, with a criminal investigation. That we understand that this man's been assessed. He's been rolling on the ground and screaming and so on, but the assessment is he is fit to answer questions and to face a criminal investigation on this.
Yeah, a criminal investigation for attempted murder. It's not been taken over yet as a terrorist investigation. No indications that it will eventually head that way as yet, but you just never know what the authorities might uncover in the hours and days ahead as they delve more into this man's background and also, of course, examine places that he's been. We're told that he was of no fixed address, in other words, effectively homeless when he was staying in this alpine town. He was living for the past decade in Sweden with his wife, but...
And had been given status there. He had legal status in Sweden dating back, some 10 years we now know?
Yeah, I mean, he's from Syria initially. He was in the Syrian army, from what we understand. Left Syria, travelled through Turkey, met, I think, his future wife in Turkey, and then went to Sweden and was granted asylum in that country. Now, we understand that he had also then, having travelled to France at the back end of last year, he'd tried to claim asylum in France.
Right.
Now, why he wanted to claim asylum in France, we're not quite sure, given that with the Schengen travel arrangements...
You've got the status for the whole of Europe.
You can travel through.
But interestingly, we're being told now that the confirmation from French authorities that this was going to be rejected, turned down, it came on Sunday when we were sort of looking at the timeline of events.
Yeah, so just a couple of days before these events, before this attack was launched. Now, it may be in applying for asylum in France. That was a bid by him to receive, you know, some kind of accommodation and benefits. Maybe he had to do that in order to qualify for those, and didn't automatically qualify for that as an asylum seeker or a refugee now in Sweden travelling to France. That will come out, of course, in the fullness of time. Was that one of the triggers that pushed him over the edge? We know, according to reports, that he had separated from his wife as well, and has a 3-year-old daughter. So all kinds of issues that the authorities will be looking at that may have been triggers. But regardless of the trigger, to go and commit an act like this is just horrific in the extreme.
Now, while we've been on air, and just to sort of show these pictures again, to get the geography, if you like, of where the park is. I mean, we did see him in the pictures yesterday making the deliberate decision to go back into the park. This is the moment, of course, he was arrested by police at the lakeside. But in terms of assessing what happened, I mean, he's being chased away from the playground here, but he'd gone back into that park at least twice. He'd made a decision to go back in there.
Yeah, you can see from the playground, Mark, that there's a wall there and a small fence. You have to go through a gate. Either that or you vault over the wall, which I think we saw him do on the video as well. But either way, you have to make a deliberate choice to go into a children's playground to target those children. He wasn't just randomly stabbing anyone that passed him in the park. He had deliberately decided that the targets of his knife attack would be the very vulnerable young children, 22 months old, the youngest, the oldest, only 3 years old.
Now, there's a bit more coming in from Antalya Telek. We've been describing his involvement. The pictures of the moment of arrest were actually filmed on his camera phone. He's a former Liverpool FC footballer, of course. He'd been jogging in the park when this all started to happen. He's said a little bit more about the incident. He said he can't stop thinking about the families that have been affected, but he's also, well, not withdrawn, but certainly put in context apparent criticism he'd received for suggesting that police perhaps have been a little slow to shoot the attacker. He said he'd posted his video on Instagram in the heat of the moment, but now saying he was in a state of shock, having had a brush with death. I want to say the police chased the assailant with a lot of courage and did their best to protect people, and I'm not questioning their bravery. So he's indicating, obviously, that, you know, a day after the event, trying to put this awful thing into some kind of context.
Yeah, because he was saying in the video, Mark, that, you know, he saw the attacker coming towards him. He stepped out of the way. The police, he said, were chasing after him but not making much ground. That point, he said, he then saw the attacker going up to these elderly people and stabbing out at them. It was at that point that he had shouted to the police, just shoot him, shoot him. And then he said shortly afterwards they were shot. Yes, he did indicate, but, you know, he's now putting that in the context that, you know, it was heat of the moment as he was seeing the events unfold.
Like many other witnesses, of course, the trauma. The live shot just interrupted for the moment, of course, just to reiterate that I think we are now minutes away from the President arriving. But Henri, let's talk about Henri again in the background here with the backpack, the so-called backpack hero. We know that Macron has asked to meet him today, and much of France is celebrating his actions and what he said as well today when we talk about trying to put these events into context.
Yes, absolutely. You know, he is a devout Roman Catholic who was on this mission to visit as many cathedrals as possible, including the cathedral in Annecy. He is going to continue that endeavour. He said, actually, he wants to do that to just help him process what he witnessed in these horrific images, that he wants to try and continue to get something constructive from that.
A moment of prayer and reflection.
And
perhaps,
acknowledging as well, Mark, that he has many more followers now on his social media in light of what's happened, so he'll be able to push that forward. But just in terms of what he was saying to the press about being there, he said, all I know is that I was not there by chance. On my journey to the cathedrals, I crossed paths with this man and I've acted instinctively. It was unthinkable to do nothing. He then basically said, I let myself be guided by Providence and the Virgin Mary. I said my adieu. They would decide, he said, what would happen next.
And we've got this special mass at the cathedral later. We wonder whether Henri will be attending to join that with many people, of course, maybe praying a prayer and thoughts for the families and indeed the youngsters in particular. Let's just update you on what we had earlier on the medical condition, because, of course, the children very much at the heart of this. And President Macron meeting the family, the British family of the 3-year-old who was being treated in Grenoble, about an hour and a half away. This is Etty, she's been named. Now, we haven't got the family's name as such, but in stable condition after undergoing surgery. 2 French cousins, then Ennio and Alba, still critical but stable in intensive care. And then the 22-month-old baby, the Dutch baby, Peter, he was taken to Geneva, about 30 miles away in Switzerland, across the lake by that air ambulance we saw yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that far away, really, 30 miles by helicopter. You're there within minutes. And in terms of what the medics do, of course, they they call ahead, obviously, to their dispatchers, their control room staff, who will find the very best and available locations for them to go to. So this major trauma centre in Geneva was there and ready to take this young child, and they diverted to that particular hospital. Others, of course, as we say, taken to Grenoble, and this elderly gentleman taken to the hospital in Annecy itself. I think the very positive thing, despite the fact that, these children are all described as still being very seriously ill, is that at least they've come out of surgery. And they've come out the other end. They're receiving that intensive care around the clock. And we just have to hope that their resilient young bodies will be able to give them a speedy recovery.
And certainly in terms of Grenoble, this is a university hospital, Grenoble. This is an area with trauma expertise and so on. It's not just a regional hospital as such.
Because the nearest hospital, of course, would be Annecy. But when you're dealing with major trauma, you want to go to the best equipped trauma centres with the best equipped doctors and other medical staff who are able to give that person who's received very serious and critical injuries the best possible chance.
And let's just update people. We think that the President is actually at that hospital at the moment, and clearly will be meeting people, or the team treating, we think, maybe the 78-year-old who was stabbed and also shot as well, having been at Grenoble a little earlier this morning with Brigitte Macron.
Yeah, we think it's the 78-year-old who is in the hospital in Annecy. There were 2 adults who were injured in this attack. One, the 78-year-old, was more seriously injured. Another adult, we're told, received more light injuries. Now, it may be that person has since been released. That kind of information hasn't come to us yet. But clearly, both the President and the First Lady, Brigitte, are in that hospital. I don't know whether they're in any position to speak to him or whether it's just loved ones that they're able to talk to and doctors in the hospital at this stage.
Now, we've got French sources indicating that indeed that the man that President Macron has visited at that hospital in Annecy is indeed the 78-year-old who was not just knifed but also shot by police. And stabbed several times. So, I mean, he's going to be in quite a state. So, clearly, the president will have wanted to speak to the medical teams first before actually sort of causing a bit of a ruction, as you can imagine, that the president turns up at a hospital when they're trying to sort of mete out medical aid to people.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way, of course, that the president would want to do anything that might interfere with the care of a very seriously injured individual. And it may be, as with the children, he, is kept back. He's able to
let the authorities do their work.
See them, but just to show his support, particularly to the families of the children who, of course, are at the hospital by their bedside, and this 78-year-old, no doubt, surrounded by his family as well, and an opportunity for the president really to get an update on the conditions of this pensioner in terms of how he is faring. Say now confirmed that he was stabbed and shot.
We're just bringing you a live shot now of the hospital at Annecy, and you can see that obviously reporters are starting to gather. We think that the president is due there or due to leave, but clearly because of security reasons they're not going to give any detail about his movements before heading on to the area of the park. And an indication that, as we said, the First Lady Brigitte Macron is with him. One reflects, of course, on there is a political aspect to this. There are many discussions going on, of course, about the position of asylum seekers in France, and we've seen, as you said, outrages elsewhere. Macron himself is in a pretty perilous political position, although he doesn't have to worry about re-election. This will be a moment that the French leader will want to try and pull his country together.
Well, as much as we acknowledge that immigration is a real issue here in the UK, it is as nothing compared to the tensions that are being felt across France at the moment because of the concerns that they have about the immigrant population in France, the fact that in many towns and cities in France, that immigrant population feels that they are, somehow not, that they are second-class citizens, that they do not assimilate and integrate into French society.
And the suburbs around Paris particularly, of course, and as you said, down south in terms
Marseille.
of Marseille,
Marseille has a very significant problem with, in particular, North African population from Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, who are there, and it is very lawless in parts. There are, without exaggeration, areas which are effectively no-go areas for the French police.
Which may be why the French authorities, like the people here in Annecy itself, are so nonplussed as to why this would have happened in such an idyllic location.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the type of location you would associate with this kind of violence, but as we know from attacks that have taken place all over the world and in, this country as well, they don't always happen in the major urban centres of population. We think of attacks in the likes of Reading and a park there a few years back where some people were enjoying a bit of respite from the first COVID lockdown when they were attacked by an asylum seeker on that occasion, who stabbed 3 of these men to death.
Now, as we're looking at these pictures of the park, the location where the attack took place, let's just reflect on what reporters had heard from Katie Jackson a little earlier today. She's a British mum of 2 who's now moved to Annecy from London some 3 years ago. Now, she was in tears when she was speaking to reporters, describing this as the pirate place. You can see the pirate ship here, that wooden structure. Now, her son Rudy was 5 years old yesterday, his birthday, and had wanted to go to what they call the pirate playground as a birthday treat. But because he was at the school, they couldn't do that. So we've got this quote from Katie saying, "It's a local treasure. That's why this is so shocking. I don't know anyone who hasn't visited the pirate playground," and an indication that, of course, it's a place that kids know and love, and perhaps reflecting, of course, that she could have been with her son there yesterday, as so many other parents, mums and dads with their children. And I think this is the message that we're getting on all these various cards and letters and pieces of paper left with the flowers and the heart balloons and so on, and the candles last night at this playground. I mean, it's become a real focal point.
Yes, we should just say, Mark, I'm hearing that the President and the First Lady have left the hospital in Nancy. They're now apparently on their way to meet investigators in charge of the ongoing investigation to get an update on what the very latest is in that ongoing inquiry. After that, we understand they will head to the park, to the scene of the attack.
And when he will meet the officials, we'll probably get confirmation that this is now still a criminal investigation. The man is accused of attempted murder because, as we were discussing earlier, clearly the discussions about his mental state. But we understand from David Chazan, who we spoke to there at the scene, police are saying, no, the decision's been made after, obviously, he was assessed. He is fit to undergo questioning.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's important from that perspective anyway, which shows that at the very least there's no very significant mental incapacity that would perhaps explain what he did, but also then prevent them from continuing to question this individual. So whatever triggered this individual to do that, it's not the most obvious of mental conditions.
Yeah. And even going so far as to deny them the PIN number, the security PIN number for his phone, his mobile phone that they have. So, again, a conscious decision being made by someone in that process.
Yeah, so the latest that I'm hearing from my producer in terms of how psychiatrists have assessed his position is that he is judged as being in an anxious and depressed state under watch in custody at the moment. That would obviously not in any way, shape or form explain the actions that unfolded yesterday, but that is to speak to his state of mind at the moment, anxious and depressed, but no obvious sign of mental incapacity at this point.
And we can see him there making the decision to run away or jog away, of course, at the scene. Because just to reiterate that, as in British law, there is the capability of deciding someone is of diminished responsibility and therefore does not face a criminal charge as such.
Yes, absolutely. We've just been hearing from the Interior Minister, the French Interior Minister has been talking to reporters as well. He says that it is a troubling coincidence, to quote him, around the timing of the refusal of the asylum application and the attack. So we were reflecting on the point just a little earlier, Mark, that he had applied, already having been granted asylum in Sweden years ago, he had applied for asylum in France after arriving in France late last year, and then was turned down and refused that asylum application because he'd already been granted asylum in Sweden. That refusal came through on Sunday. And then, of course, this attack took place yesterday, Thursday, just a matter of days later.
So clearly that will be a matter of direct concern for them putting the timeline together. Just to explain again, we got the live picture back. This is outside the hospital in Nancy, where we believe, according to your reports now, Mark, that the President and First Lady have left, going to meet the investigators and the administrative and criminal team, the police team.
Yeah, so they'll get an update, of course, on who this individual is, what on earth might have motivated him to carry out this horrific attack, whether there's any suggestion of terror, whether it may have been some kind of, retaliation or vengeance for being turned down from his asylum claim by the French authorities. We just don't know at this stage.
And just explain to us once more, clearly there's been comment on his position in terms of the political discussion, the narrative that goes on, of course, in France about the position of asylum seekers and, the now we have a motorcade arriving. So is this perhaps the presidential motorcade? Certainly, we've got what appears to be a security official or a...
Yes, I don't think that's at the park. I think that's at the police prefecture that we're looking at the moment. The steps up to that police headquarters.
There is President Macron just getting out the car, shaking hands there. And we think that the First Lady Brigitte Macron is there. Yes, there she is, coming to shake hands as well. So this now occasion, we think this is when they're going to get an update from the authorities on where the inquiry, the investigation is, having spoken to the doctors and the medical teams a short time ago.
Yes, and you were talking about the sort of political backdrop of this, given the very heightened tensions over issues around immigration and asylum in France as well. So the confirmation that he was turned down in his asylum application in Sunday, and then just a few days later launches this attack, that will be of deep concern to officials in terms of working out what on earth you do that could possibly safeguard against a situation where people are given, what can be a very profound decision on their life. In other words, you're not getting asylum, you're not getting all the benefits that would come with that in terms of the state helping you out. In this case, he's not necessarily going to be thrown out of the country because he can travel where he likes.
Well, this is a point you were explaining yesterday, that he was granted that legal status in Sweden, and therefore he had the ability to move within Europe under the Schengen Agreement without sort of being challenged. He had that legal status. And this is why he was refused that status in France on Sunday, because it had already been granted in Sweden.
Yes.
So it's sort of gone round in a full circle, if you like.
Yeah, and as I say, it may have been that he was applying for... It seems odd and extreme that he would apply for asylum twice, but if you've moved to another country, you're not then being supported by the state, and we understand he was homeless, then perhaps that is your avenue to receive that kind of state support. And as I say, there is a pattern here that we have seen in the past, sadly, and, it is an issue that we can't really shirk, where a number of individuals that have been turned down for asylum applications in the past have then gone on to commit really horrible crimes.
But it's still the status that this is not being regarded as terrorist-related. They're sticking with this while these inquiries continue as to what has gone on. But from what you've just said, there will be a political fallout of some nature for Macron.
Yeah, and as I say, the political fallout comes against the backdrop of these very significant tensions in France about this whole issue, and particularly, of course, about an issue of those who are coming across, as happens, of course, here in the UK, and claim asylum. As I said, on this issue of people who have committed crimes in the past having been refused asylum, we had a couple of years back the man who blew himself up outside the Liverpool Maternity Hospital, another young man from Iraq who was turned down, who then detonated a bomb at Parsons Green Tube Station in London.
Yeah, the consequence of these events. Mark, for the moment, thank you for that. So we have President Macron, who has arrived there, speaking to officials at the moment with the First Lady Brigitte Macron, as we saw. We'll have the very latest live from Annecy shortly. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's take you straight back to France and the pictures live from inside the prefecture where President Macron and First Lady Brigitte Macron are meeting members of the emergency services, the medical teams, the police and the local authorities who've been involved in this operation. He was at the hospital earlier to meet the teams who've been looking after the 78-year-old. He's the one who was stabbed and shot, who's being treated at the hospital there. And earlier meeting the British family of Etty, the little 3-year-old British girl being treated at Grenoble, about an hour and a half away from this lakeside city. And also 2 French cousins, Ennio and Alba, being treated there. Peter, the 22-month-old Dutch baby in Geneva. For obvious reasons, the president won't be travelling there. But clearly he's wanting to speak to and shake hands with all these people and share a few words. And as we saw with all the cards and the letters and the flowers and the balloons at the Lakeside Park, this is a city trying to assess the awful, physical and psychological damage that was made in this attack with these youngsters. Many of the notes on the various cards trying to understand what on earth the motive would be for attacking these very small children, and of course the trauma that's been felt as a result. Now, we do think that the president has either met or will be meeting the backpack heroes. He's called Henri, who we saw chasing the assailant. And this, we understand, Mark, has got a significance as well, bearing in mind what happened yesterday, this location.
Yeah, the prefecture was the first place the school pupils came to, and the preschool pupils indeed, when they were caught up in this attack, those who were not injured. So they were taken to the prefecture as a sort of place of refuge.
Safety and refuge.
Just so they could be held in a location, a place of safety, as you say, while the emergency services, particularly the police, dealt with the issue.
Because we understand it wasn't just sort of the play school or pre-school children that were there. There was a group of sixth formers who described the trauma that they've undergone witnessing what unfolded.
Yeah, because so this playground is very popular, especially with preschoolers. Mums are there in their strollers, as we saw that poor woman, unfortunately, who was trying to get in the way of the attacker to try to stop him
with a push
stabbing that infant of hers in the stroller. So it's popular with very young children, but also with older children as well. There was a school outing, Mark, that was in that playground as well at the time that the attack unfolded. Now, we're being told that he's meeting all of those first responders. So, of course, that's the police and it's the paramedics. It's also in France firefighters, because they... a number of countries around the world, their firefighters also run a paramedic service. So they are part of that emergency medical responding trauma teams. So we saw the red paramedic vehicles of the fire service there yesterday as well. So they are being spoken to and thanked by Emmanuel Macron and the First Lady, Brigitte Macron.
Yeah, she's speaking independently as well, because as you were indicating, this is not just a presidential visit as such. It is the two of them together to perhaps speak on a more direct level than just the sort of political leader being seen to shake hands and so on, because clearly this has shaken people to the core, looking at particularly what we heard from this Katie, who's an expat who's actually moved to Annecy, was actually due to be in the park yesterday. I mean, a lot of people thinking, I could have been there.
Yeah. And on the investigation, Mark, the very latest we're hearing from the regional prosecutor in Annecy is that she will hold a news conference at 11 a.m. UK time tomorrow to update reporters on the very latest phase of the investigation. But we were hearing, in terms of the attacker, that although he is anxious and depressed is his mental state at the moment in custody, there doesn't appear to be any very significant mental incapacity that means he is not able to be interviewed further by the prosecutor. So that's important in terms of the motivation. If we're not talking about a significant mental episode, what was the trigger? And of course, we heard from the Interior Minister saying how troubling it was, the timing of that decision to turn down his asylum application and then the attack a few days later.
Gendarmerie here, which is a sort of a mix between a military force and police, of course, in terms of France, like the Carabinieri in Italy. So again, I think they are constantly armed, aren't they, gendarmes?
All of the police in France are routinely armed. It's a topic of much debate in this country from time to time about the routine arming of police officers. We have gone down a route of preferring to have specialist teams who have that very onerous responsibility of carrying lethal weapons. In France, they've taken a different route, as of many countries, in routinely arming all of their officers. Of course, it means that the very first officers on the scene of an attack like this can use lethal force to stop someone.
They didn't have to call in a firearms unit as such,
So those first officers responding and arriving would very probably have been routine patrol officers rather than any specialist anti-terror unit. So, an indication, of course, the positive side of routinely arming all of your police force, but there are the negatives as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting just to backtrack. We were just talking about Anthony Letellic, of course, the former Liverpool football player who'd witnessed this attack yesterday had followed the events then on his camera phone, and he'd been urging the police as they were chasing him to actually open fire on him.
Yeah, to be fair to the police, though, in those circumstances, and I think he himself, because he's put out a clarification of the fact that he was speaking in the heat of the moment.
Saying that they should have maybe intervened rather quicker than they did.
What you've got when you've got an armed police officer with a lethal weapon in his hand chasing someone, by this former Liverpool player's own words in the post that he puts out there, he said the attacker was coming towards him. In other words, he was in line of fire. You know, he was potentially at risk of being shot himself had police fired and missed that attacker, as we know.
And we know the 78-year-old, of course, who's being treated in hospital in Annecy, is suffering from a gunshot wound we think is a stray bullet in exactly these circumstances you've described.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things you have to, you know, there's a great responsibility in carrying a weapon that could end someone's life. So they are highly trained as to when to use it. And although it might be the instinct of any civilian seeing that person and shouting, shoot him, the officer has got to be very careful and try and ensure that there's no one in their line of fire. And sadly, on this occasion, we know that that 78-year-old pensioner was.
Now, we've got a huge number of people that the presidential couple are speaking to, indicating, of course, that, you know, this is actually quite a major city. Even though it's a sort of idyllic lakeside location, it's a major regional hub for this part of the Alps. And that may have well helped, I guess, in how quickly the medical teams and the police teams reacted yesterday.
Yeah, we saw two of those life flight helicopters in the park in Annecy not long after the event unfolded. They are strategically positioned to be able to get into the Alps quickly because it is an area where there are accidents and medical episodes on a regular occurrence. We should say, Mark, from what is going on here, we're hearing that Emmanuel Macron, understandably, has been praising the police officers for their very rapid action
which is what we've just been discussing,
in dealing with this attacker. Remember, within 4 minutes, the police have told us, within 4 minutes of the first emergency calls being received, the attacker had been subdued and detained by officers after being shot. That is a very, very quick time to respond and to deal with that.
And the air ambulances there on the scene within, again, minutes. So that perhaps is something that the President will be thanking those teams for, and an indication too as well that as we see the scenes of the aftermath of the attack with the man with the backpack there, Henri, as we've been discussing, that the President has asked to meet him as well. I mean, wonders if there will be some official honours in terms being bestowed on him at some stage.
So Henri, along with a few other civilians, were the very first on the scene that tried to do their very best to chase this man off. And that worked, because we saw the video of him running away from the scene, walking and half jogging away from the scene. So they had the desired effect in pushing him away from the children. Also, sorry, Mark.
I was going to say, it's an interesting sort of perspective, because you were talking earlier about how the authorities have say don't be a have-a-go hero, but what we've seen unfold here actually is it may well have saved other people and protected other children.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult one. The authorities in this day and age, with all of the issues around health and safety and the possibility that they could find themselves on the wrong end of a lawsuit, will not say to you now, go, have a go, try and stop, intervene if you see someone being attacked. They won't say that, but then there's this juxtaposed position. It's almost slightly schizophrenic, because those same law enforcement officials will then give you a bravery award for intervening and doing what they've told you not to do. It's just one of those peculiar quirks. I should say again, with regard to Emmanuel Macron, he's been hearing from one of the police officers first on scene. The officers
obviously were there before the paramedics, and they are trained, and they will give whatever, once they've been assured that the attacker has been subdued, they will give whatever help they can to those who've been affected. So they've been hearing from one officer in particular who gave life-saving first aid to one of the children. We're told that he is now about to meet Henri, the now famous and celebrated backpack hero who's on this pilgrimage to cathedrals in the area, including the cathedral there in Annecy.
Where indeed there will be this this special mass a little later. We assume, we don't know this for certain, that the President and the First Lady will also be attending that, and maybe certainly Henri, you can see in the back of the picture there with his backpack, because as we were learning from him in what he said, he is a committed Catholic, and basically he thinks he was put there in the right place at the right time to actually intervene directly.
Yes, absolutely. He said that it was fate that put him there, and that his conscience and, you know, his religious teachings meant that he could do nothing else than intervene to try to help. He was saying that with regard to the news that this Syrian refugee is also a Christian, responding to that, he said, "It's profoundly un-Christian to attack the vulnerable. The entire Christian civilization on which this country is built," he says, has a knightly message, knight as in knight in shining armour, to defend widows and orphans. I think that, on the contrary, something very bad inhabited him and inhabited this attacker.
That's his reflection. Well, we've got confirmation of the public prosecutor there, whose offices will be in this particular building here, that the custody has been extended this morning, Friday morning, so he's still being held on a criminal charge of attempted murder. But just to reiterate that President Macron and Brigitte had flown to Grenoble earlier, where they met 3 of the children injured in the attack, including the British family and the British 3-year-old who is being treated, we understand now, in stable condition. That is 3-year-old Etty. We haven't got a family name as yet. And also meeting the teams that were looking after them before they headed back here to Arcy. So they're trying to get round everyone directly involved in this to speak to them personally.
Yes, and of course there's also what always has to be weighed up in the aftermath of a major event like this is, yes, of course, a head of state, a political leader wants to be there to, you know, show that they are with the people, to lend that sort of moral and sometimes spiritual support. But they don't want to get in the way of the medical personnel who are treating these very seriously injured young children.
How much do you become a distraction for the investigation and, of course, particularly the medical teams and so on?
So we understand this has been more about just meeting the families and just giving them love and support and understanding, and telling them that, you know, the French nation is there to help and ensure that their loved ones, these young children, will be looked after with the very best medical care that the French authorities have. I'm told, Mark, that Henri, our star of the moment, is waiting at the back of the room, the unassuming character that he is, waiting to be spoken to by
Can we spot him there in the it's not "Where's Wally," but "Where's Henri"? And perhaps he's going to be slightly overwhelmed by all this attention, isn't it? You know, he was just enjoying what was a personal pilgrimage to this cathedral city. But I guess that will perhaps be the picture that the French press will feature on their front pages the moment that Macron met Henri.
He's 24 years old, just. He's a young lad who was on this pilgrimage to these cathedrals. He said, what I know is that I was not there by chance. He said that, you know, he crossed paths with this man for a reason. And said, I reacted instinctively, Mark. He said, I didn't even think. To me, it was unthinkable not to do anything. I reacted how every French person should act, he says, which means I followed my instinct and did everything I could to protect the weak. And he was making a point in the interviews that he's been given to the French media that actually this highlights how, you know, if you can, then you should try and intervene. You should try to help the vulnerable and the weak.
Now, it's interesting the cameras have had to move away. Whether, in fact, President has asked maybe for a few private moments with Henri, we don't know. But we'll continue to monitor this presidential visit, of course. And as Mark and I were discussing, we've got the cathedral mass later as well. And, of course, the President and First Lady meeting many more of the first responders there. But let's just break away from events in France. We will head back to RC shortly, but let's reflect on other developments on the, well, so-called special relationship, of course, because President Biden describing US-UK ties as being in real good shape after the talks with Rishi Sunak at the White House yesterday evening. The pair signing the so-called Atlantic Declaration, including commitments to ease trade barriers, forge closer defence industry ties and agree a data protection deal. Let's speak now to David Dunn, Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham, who could join us. David, thank you for your time. The glaring admission, though, of course, is no free trade deal as advertised in the 2019 Tory manifesto.
Absolutely. The UK wanted a comprehensive free trade agreement, but it turns out that the Biden administration doesn't do free trade with the UK or indeed anybody else. This massive $1 trillion Inflation Reduction Act is all about protecting green industries in the US, and the consolation prize is that the UK gets a bit of that pie, but in terms of actually allowing UK manufactured electric cars to be imported with the same concessions into the American market. But fundamentally, as you say, that comprehensive free trade agreement that the Tories were so keen on, that it was meant to be the big prize of Brexit, is just not forthcoming.
And in terms of that deal, I mean, let's dial back and reflect that the so-called Inflation Reduction Bill, as the Americans called it, in terms of supporting their own industry, the subsidy some $369 billion. And I think in terms of the UK, we've been sort of earmarking, what, about $1 billion overall in terms of helping our industries.
Absolutely. And in global terms, it's relatively small beer. So the grand-sounding Atlantic Declaration is diplomatic speak for make it sound grand, to cover the fact that the substance is actually quite light compared to other things. Indeed, the Biden administration's quite big on its titles for things. We recently had a bilateral deal with the Koreans where that was called the Washington Declaration. And of course, if you go back 2 years, Biden and Boris Johnson and Cornwall had the New Atlantic Charter. So they're big on the titles, not so big on the substance when it comes to the reality of the actual economic benefits that the UK will gain from this.
Yeah, the titles are stacking up. But I mean, in terms of the geopolitics, interesting that Biden used that phrase, special relationship, heading back to the days of Churchill, of course, although Sunak went for indispensable alliance, which perhaps hasn't got quite the same pizzazz. But clearly they are trying to establish the balance of geopolitics with, you know, Russia and China becoming an ever more present threat.
Absolutely. The UK-US relationship is always strongest when security issues are to the fore. And therefore we had the talk about how the UK was in lockstep with America and offering solidarity, and indeed the UK and the US have sort of chivied along many of the other allies, especially in Europe, to support Ukraine. So when that's the case, it's easy for that to be celebrated at a bilateral level. And of course, for good measure, they talked about the economic threat from China, China stealing secret intellectual property and the like. So the atmospherics of the summit were very much about championing how much the UK and the US had a joint approach joint values, a jointly robust approach to Russia over Ukraine, a now in-step approach to China and limiting China's economic access. So the idea of globalization is gone, and the UK is pitching in with America for a share of its protectionist approach to economics for the future.
Just another, I'll just say a quick thought. I just wonder what a certain Donald Trump made of seeing these pictures in the White House, because, of course, he had a very different declaration having to be made with facing these 7 federal charges now. This is going to add a little bit of interest to the presidential race for Biden and Trump as we head towards 2024.
Absolutely. These charges are potentially a game changer in terms of the public attitudes. Trump has tried to dismiss the sexual assault conviction in New York as New York politics, only a civil case. He's managed to actually persuade his base that they shouldn't be too concerned about the hush money for Stormy Daniels. But this is very different. This is about national security and at a federal level. And from by all accounts, the case is fairly watertight in terms of the evidence they have about him obstructing justice, and of course the illegal retention of very serious documents, over 100 documents, some of which are reportedly 40 pages long, one of which is meant to be a Pentagon plan for how it would bomb Iran in the event that was necessary. And if he has held on to those, if he has shared those with his golf buddies, then the case against him is very serious indeed, despite the defense that many Republicans have come to as a consequence of these charges.
And I think that's where he's been exactly today, on the golf course in New Jersey. No word from him today as yet, but of course we'll see what emerges on that. David, thank you very much indeed for your time, reflecting on that Atlantic Declaration. Well, from Washington to Doncaster, yes, because after those hectic days in Washington, Rishi Sunak is heading up north for a gathering of Red Wall Tory MPs. We'll be reflecting on that in a moment. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Well, a hectic schedule for the Prime Minister after those talks with the President in Washington. Rishi Sunak now heading to the north of England for a gathering of Red Wall Tory MPs. The Prime Minister expected to speak at the annual conference on matters such as levelling up, remember that? And how the Tories plan to shape what was once called, or is it again being called, the Northern Powerhouse. Well, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was due to give the speech at last year's event, of course, before pulling out at the 11th hour, so he would address matters in Ukraine. Well, let's get the very latest from the conference now, with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, those phrases are seemingly back on the top of the agenda, but one assesses now, in terms of the red wall as well, you know, are the foundations holding firm there?
Well, that's a big question, and there are lots and lots of MPs at this particular conference who owe their seats to how the Red Wall, as it became known, crumbled in 2019. And there are some big questions as to whether this sweeping, this blue wave, as it was described by one Conservative MP here a little bit earlier, will remain here. And there are lots of sort of policy discussions taking place as to how this party, which everyone acknowledges is fairly considerably behind in the polls right now, how it could possibly turn things around in the next 12 months or so in order to retain at least a decent number of these seats in places like Doncaster. And there are lots of different ideas about how to move on from what is quite an amorphous concept of levelling up that means relatively different things to different people. And one of the ideas that has been floated this morning is returning to this idea of the northern powerhouse, of delivering the sort of infrastructure connections, particularly between places like Manchester and Leeds, and making it more of an economic area to rival that of London in the south, getting what are known as agglomeration effects going. And to be fair, there has been quite a lot of fairly nerdy discussion here. Sometimes these conferences are described in the media as if they're sort of factional infighting, plotting, bickering. If anything, this is a bit of a nerdy gathering here in Doncaster.
Yeah, and the title of the Northern Research Group Conference it's not sort of that exciting. However, it is vital, of course, in terms of what we just discussed as levelling up and the Northern Powerhouse actually getting it to work in action.
It certainly is, and that's why what this conference is actually sort of here to produce is a Northern manifesto for the Conservative Party. They'll be discussing lots of ideas. There are currently breakout sessions going on, chaired by MPs, with members feeding into that sort of policy discussion. And this group, this Northern Research Group, will come out at the end of this with concrete policy suggestions for the government that they hope will then go into the Conservative manifesto. And they've got a fairly strong chance of that happening. After all, the keynote speaker of this conference today is none other than the Prime Minister, who has already come back to the United Kingdom from his 2-day stint in Washington, D.C. He's got a little bit of respite down in number 10 and is zooming on his way up here to Doncaster to give this keynote speech this afternoon.
And, of course, while everyone is in Doncaster, there has been a bit more drama down in Westminster. The latest parliamentary suspension coming through. This time, Labour Shadow Minister Bambus Sharon-Malombus suspended by the party after a complaint about his conduct.
Certainly, and this is the now 16th Labour MP who has been suspended at some point in the last. I think I've got my numbers wrong there. I think it might have been the 13th Labour MP who has been suspended since the last general election, and that is a disciplinary concern within the party. Of course, there are no official details as to why this suspension has taken place. There is an investigation ongoing. ongoing, and Bambos Charalambos himself has said that he awaits the outcome of that investigation.
Yeah, and one should perhaps reflect there have been suspensions on both sides. It seems that there are increasing numbers of MPs losing their whip, i.e., the party position while these investigations are carried out. Is there a growing question as to whether the parliamentary authorities should intervene in these cases now, rather than the parties themselves?
Well, there has been this discussion ongoing for quite some time. There is now the Independent Parliamentary Grievance and Complaints Scheme that has been established in recent years, where serious complaints can be taken to Parliament. But ultimately, generally what goes on is a sort of organisational structure designed by the parties themselves, and that has come under criticism. There are currently a number of Labour MPs suspended for unknown reasons. There are 3 Labour MPs who are currently suspended for reasons that have not been made public, and that means that sometimes what happens is that people go to the press rather than the party, and people have complained about that.
Thank you very much for that in Doncaster, and back when the Prime Minister arrives. But let's take you back to Annecy in France, because the French Premier there, the President, is speaking at the moment to all those first responders.
Parce que dès les premières minutes de ce drame et de ce qui reste une barbarie, et je ne veux pas moi qualifier.
Indicate the President has been meeting all those first responders, from the medical teams to the gendarmerie to the police, and those within this prefecture, the building here in the centre of Annecy, this lakeside city. And as Mark White was indicating to us, this actually was a place of refuge yesterday for many who had been caught in this stabbing in the park, in particular a group of school children, 6 formers this time rather than the preschool children. And they had found some safety and refuge here. The President has been saying that he said more than 100 people were involved in this particular emergency operation, and he has spoken of the solidarity of the French nation, the children and the adults involved. One of the injured, he said, with them there as well. Of course, there was the 2 adults as well as the children. The 78-year-old stabbing victim still in hospital in Annecy, but the other one not as seriously hurt. I think to his right, if you look at the gentleman with the glasses, he was, I think he's got a bandage there, if you can just see on his elbow. So the President pointing that particular issue out. And we believe he's also been speaking with Henri, the so-called backpack hero, who we saw in those pictures chasing the assailant out of the park. But the President going on to saying that he wanted to thank everyone there from the first moment he said of the terrible act to attack children is what had upset people most, and of course the importance of those who had intervened immediately. Mark White is with us once more in the studio, been following this story with me from yesterday, and the President clearly indicating not just those, Mark, who had been involved in the operation, but we can see there to his left one of the victims as well.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, talking to Henri that we've heard from as well, and the emergency service workers who were quickly on scene. But he's saying, you know, what I've heard is that we have the biggest hope that everyone will recover. So that is good. Good news, an indication from the President that he's been told by the doctors that although they're very seriously injured, all of those who were injured as a result of this attack will recover, the hope is.
Yeah. He's going on to say this was due to your professionalism, talking to these people, and bravery. You didn't ask questions, you intervened quickly. And this is something you were touching on earlier, Mark, the fact that it's some 4 minutes before the medical teams and the police actually intervened. I mean, incredibly quick when one wonders what would have happened perhaps in a British city or town.
Yeah, but we've seen, thankfully, in British cities and towns as well, there's always 1 or 2 who are willing to just push forward, even though they're not those first responders, but they push forward and they confront the violence. We saw it at London Bridge with the attack at Borough Market, and we've seen it with this attack yesterday with those members of the public unarmed, except in Henri's case for a backpack he was carrying, but pushing forward all the same.
Yeah, the President going on, thank you so much for having intervened so effectively, for having stopped further crimes being committed, to all the medics and to the rescue workers. But perhaps we reflect on two things in particular, Mark. One is that the police are armed, so they actually were armed. They didn't have to call in a firearms unit. And the two air ambulances that were there so quickly because of the location, this lakeside resort with the helicopters as the regional administrative centre used to go up into the mountains for mountain rescue and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a live debate in this country because, you know, our police force is not routinely armed. You will have certain response crews who have tasers, which, of course, in this particular instance, when you're dealing with someone with a knife, they can work. Often they don't, just depending if they get the right connection. So, yes, having police in France who are all routinely armed means that they have that lethal force if they need to be able to take down someone with a lethal weapon such as a knife.
Yeah. So the President going on to praise what he says on a professional and a human level, you are all remarkable. If people have been saved, it's because of your first response. So clearly, having met all these people and listened to their stories, he's building up this picture of just how quickly everyone came together.
Well, yes, he spoke to one police officer who was quickly on scene, and once the attacker was subdued, gave life-saving help to one of those injured children. We're told, he told the President that he gave cardiopulmonary resuscitation to a child, so CPR, to one of those injured children in the playground.
To indicate how badly they were hurt, because obviously with the stabbing, it's the loss of blood immediately that puts people's lives at risk.
Yeah, those children were gravely ill, and only thanks, as he says, to the professionalism of, yes, those first responders and the police officer in this case, but then also the surgeons and the doctors and nurses back in the hospitals. They've been able to, hopefully, they're on the right trajectory to making a full recovery.
Now, perhaps here an indication as we see the shots on the right-hand side of Henri, the backpack hero, as he's been described, chasing the man from the park. The President now reflecting, as I said, you are all remarkable on a professional and human level. He went on to say, if people were saved, it's because of the first response, and the power of the public is so important in events like this, said the President. It's a force which comes together to protect on occasions like this. And you were indicating from what Henri had said that he didn't hesitate, he didn't think about this. It was just a natural response. So the applause there for the President's words, saying, I want to think about you as well as the emotional support you will need after this trauma. The President reflecting, I'm very proud of you all.
Well, Henri said in terms of the emotional impact that his mind is full of the images that he saw in that park yesterday morning. But that is just sort of pushed him forward in terms of his determination to go to the remaining cathedrals that he has to see, because he wants to use that as a way of positive construction that will hopefully take his mind off the events that happened and steer him in a more positive direction
and
forward.
a moment of prayer and reflection, perhaps, as, of course, the rest of RC will share in later, because just to reiterate, we've got this special Mass at the cathedral that he was visiting a little later this evening.
Yes, and just to say on his closing remarks, the President saying that he's very proud of what was done by those who were simply there and the role each of you took. You did your duty, he said, but you did more. In this room, you all embodied the France that we want to see. Vive la République.
Vive la France. Yeah, and then I think the applause came in on that.
I'm sure that went down very well in the room.
Yeah, we think he may well be going to the park and the play area. We're not sure about that because obviously there are security concerns, but certainly his very heartfelt thanks there to the first responders. Mark, for the moment, thank you. We'll keep you updated, of course, with the President's movements there in RC and bring you the latest pictures. But let's break away to reflect on events here in Britain, with a teenager dying after being followed on his e-bike by police in Salford last night. They'd been pursuing the 15-year-old, but then forced to halt because of bollards there in the road on that traffic island. The boy said to have proceeded down another road, then colliding with an ambulance. The crew attended to him, brought him to hospital, but he subsequently died despite their efforts. Well, the Independent Office for Police Conduct now has started an investigation. Let's speak to our reporter Jack Carson, who's there at the scene in Salford for us. And we have to reflect, Jack, that emotion's very raw there, and obviously this is why the police have had to call in an external body to look at the sequence of events.
Yeah, lots of very different emotions here, of course. Lots of people upset. This community starting to come together now this afternoon to reflect on the loss of life that happened here yesterday afternoon. 15-year-old Sal Cookson has been named as the boy who was involved in that incident. Greater Manchester Police confirmed that traffic officers were following him here, where he went through the police. You can see the bollards behind me. That's as far as the police could go. Sal then turned right, where he then collided with an ambulance that was on its way back to an ambulance station. And people here this morning have been coming and laying tributes. Lots of people saying that they couldn't say a bad word about Sal and talking about how tragic it is. Of course, also lots of questions around the police following him on his e-bike. Lots of questions, of course, around why they were following him. Of course, the response there, this comes today as Andy Cook, who's the chief of the constabulary, has been saying how public trust in the police is at one of the worst levels, and its public trust is hanging, he says, by a thread. Now, there was a local resident here, Wesley Hainig, who said he was a witness to the incident. Here's what he told us earlier.
I stood at my friend's house over there. I seen a Range Rover coming down here very fast. And I thought, why is that coming down so fastly? And I looked, and my son, who's, God bless the young man, is his friend. He said, "Can you see that in front of you?" I said, "No, I can't." And it was rapid. It went dead fast. And he went round there, and the ambulance hit him. You know what I mean? And I thought, boom, I heard the noise, you know what I mean? Then police made him drive round there that fast. And I witnessed that. And I heard the noise, I knew there was something really bad, you know what I mean? Okay, yeah, my son was crying his eyes out. He's a good little friend. He's a good kid, him.
And Jack, of course, we reflect that the earlier reports were suggesting that the ambulance may have been stationary, but clearly eyewitnesses are telling a slightly different narrative of the events.
Yeah, the North West Ambulance Service has confirmed that the ambulance was being driven back to a local ambulance station when that collision with Sol occurred. But they have also said that as soon as that collision and as soon as the paramedics were able to get out of the vehicle, they did it. They were the first to respond and attend to Sal and his injuries. He was then rushed to hospital, where, of course, unfortunately, he later passed away. Greater Manchester Police, as you mentioned, have reported themselves to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. They have been here today investigating, doing their own investigations around the incident, but they'll also be looking, of course, at the post-incident procedures that the police are going to, of course, to make sure that everything is up to standard and, of course, to try and renew some of the respect between the locals and the police here, because, as you can imagine, both it's very sad emotions, but, of course, lots of people very angry at the reaction of the police to follow Sal in the first place.
OK, Jack, in Salford, thank you for that. More, of course, as we get it. But let's talk about some cash-strapped local authorities now who say they're continuing to face funding concerns, with many full-time carers finding they simply cannot afford to take a break for some respite. Well, those breaks supposed to be a statutory right. So what more can be done to help them? Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has been taking a look at how it impacts care relationships.
Here in the UK, respite care is a statutory right. It's assessed and should be provided by local authorities. And yet, according to the State of Caring report, last year 41% of full-time carers were unable to take a single day off. Sue has been caring for her mum Linda since she was 14 years old. They've been attending Sandpiper's Respite facility in Southport for the last decade. But as funding becomes increasingly tight, their one chance at a holiday has been put at risk.
You know, I haven't got any money. I'm reliant on benefit. I get less than £2 an hour for looking after Linda. But she's my mum, so I'd do it anyway, regardless.
Her full-time role as a carer means Sue can't take on another job, and without funding, her own well-being is taking the strain.
I don't really feel valued. I don't feel appreciated. I don't feel like I've got no self-worth, no nothing. It's like it's not recognised about what I'm doing when I'm saving the government an absolute fortune.
Run by respite care charity Revitalise, Sandpipers also provide breaks for their guests with disabilities. Without this, many of them would struggle.
I don't think we'd cope. There'd be no point to life for me. There'd be no point for Mum and Dad because it gives them a break, it's their lifeline. And without that, they'd struggle.
As this sector continues to face drastic cuts, the cost of living crisis is also having a major impact. Affordability is an ever-increasing issue, and the knock-on effect of that is that people with disabilities and their carers are not getting the breaks they so desperately need. In a recent survey of their guests, Revitalise found 56% would simply be unable to take a break without the support of funding. This is an issue they're trying to combat with their new campaign.
The Give Me a Break appeal aims to raise broad awareness of the absolute crisis that we are seeing in respite care. This is a funding crisis, and the reason for that is that there simply is not enough money in the system. And what this means is that more and more people cannot afford to take respite breaks. And respite breaks are critically important for the health and well-being of both the carer and the disabled person.
Without proper time off, caring relationships all over the UK are suffering. But as the cost of living crisis continues to spiral, the question remains, is there any money left to give them the breaks they need? Sophie Reaper, GB News.
And the plight of the carers, who cares for them, of course. Now, let's reflect that we've got the Met Office issuing a severe weather warning for the weekend. Temperatures could hit 30 degrees. That's hotter than Marbella, Ibiza, Tenerife and Lanzarote all put together, would you believe? An amber heat health alert issued for some, meaning that health services could be affected, people suffering from heat-related illnesses, especially the old and vulnerable. And fire services, too, warning about wildfires, urging people to be vigilant this weekend, reminding them to bring a picnic and not a barbecue. Well, on that particular topic, let's speak now to Christian Stevenson, also known as DJ Barbecue, who can tell us about how to do it all responsibly. Thanks for joining us. And I guess, you know, it is pertinent, bearing in mind all the wildfires in Canada that have hit New York and so on. These things can get out of control very quickly. So what's the watchword about where you can cook safely?
Well, just be careful, you know. Use fuel wisely. Don't use too much. Like whenever I set up a grill, I always just put a bit of charcoal on one side, no charcoal on the other. That way I've got safe zones. I'm not getting crazy kind of fat deposits going down on my charcoal with big flames rising. It's about being safe and being efficient with your cooking and giving yourself temperature zones, because I want to goof-proof my cooking. I want it easy. I want to have a good time while I'm cooking out. But yeah, you got to put the suntan lotion on, make sure you hydrate, and more importantly, have a good time.
Yeah, and I can see you haven't got the gloves on, so I might pick you up on a health and safety issue. I mean, should you actually have, you know, oven-proof gloves as well to be very safe?
Well, I mean, if I'm moving stuff around, sure. But, I mean, I got a good set of tongs. Always get a set of tongs. It's like an extension of your hand. Yeah. And I've got a really good set of tongs here. I can, utilize everything on the grill. I've only got so much real estate on top, and I've got this whole new world of cooking opportunities in the coals. So I'm dirty cooking in there. So I'm throwing like root vegetables in there, like beetroots, onions, just looking after, all my food. I got some fruit up here. I'm grilling some pineapples for like a pineapple salsa. I'm being safe, but I'm also having a good time.
Okay, barbecue beetroot. Well, that's a new one on me. However, let's just address something of some importance, and that is, of course, a lot of people buy these disposable barbecues nowadays, and I guess the danger is if you have that on the ground and you've got dry, tinder-like conditions around you, that's when problems can get out of control.
Correct. And, I try to say don't use those things because they're just a hazard. They're full of petrol because they want that charcoal to light really quickly. You can't get a really good product out of there. You'll get like a burnt sausage on the outside or burnt chicken on the outside. Then it'll be raw in the middle. No one wants salmonella. And you also don't want to start a fire. So you can get portable little grills. Like, some of the big brands make like portable ones, like the Smoky Joes and little tabletop ones. Get one of them. They're safer. They're more efficient, and you'll get better food.
OK, so buy some decent kit and make sure it's obviously off the ground. The only thing I might just question is the beetroot. But thank you very much anyway for introducing us into that particular treat. Christian, we'll let you get on with your lunch, or is it tea now? But thank you very much indeed. And, of course, be careful this weekend. Now, away from that, so another burning issue. Manchester City, do they have a date with destiny? Pep Guardiola's men taking on Inter Milan in that Champions League final in Istanbul. And, of course, if victorious, securing the historic treble after having won the Premier League and the FA Cup. Let's speak to senior sports reporter at CBS, Ben Jacobs, who is, yes, in Istanbul for us, I gather. Ben, thank you very much for joining us. Do they have to pick themselves up again after that FA Cup and go again? And is it psychological as much as physical?
I think, if anything, winning the FA Cup made it a case of one game and complete the treble. And they beat Manchester United, and that's who they'll emulate from 1999. So I don't think it's a case of picking themselves up. I think that they're very focused, laser focused, in fact. And back in 2021, when Manchester City lost to Chelsea in the Champions League final, I think tactically Pep Guardiola overthought things. So it should just be a case of Manchester City knowing they're the favourites and trying to stay as relaxed as possible. But Inter have had a fantastic season as well. They can do a Champions League Coppa Italia double. So everyone's presuming that this, of all three things, Premier League, FA Cup and Champions League, now is more routine because Manchester City are overwhelming favourites. So they must stay focused, because if they're complacent, then they just might blow the treble.
Right, because I was going to ask you, is European football different? Is it a slightly different structure, played at a different pace? And when you've been used to playing English clubs, as Man United in the FA Cup final, you've got to sort of readjust a bit.
I think that Inter will set up defensively, that's for sure. And then what makes it unique too is that it's at a neutral venue. Yes, so was the FA Cup final, but quite clearly Manchester City are familiar with both Manchester United, who they beat, and Wembley Stadium, whereas in Istanbul, you're talking about a very open venue. And on top of that, it's humid. And this is why the game kicks off late, so that can knock players out of their routine as well. So there's a variety of different factors, but Manchester City is simply going to have to be patient. And make no mistake, Inter will try and box out Manchester City through the centre and shut out Kevin De Bruyne, be resilient defensively. And then when the ball's played forward, you've got Lautaro Martinez, who's scored almost 30 goals this season. You've got Romelu Lukaku, who's trying to prove something after the World Cup and is, of course, still technically on loan from Chelsea, even though he may join Inter following the Champions League final. And Edin Dzeko could come on and become the oldest scorer in a Champions League final. And he, of course, is ex-Manchester City. So there's a few intriguing plot lines here, but Manchester City, if they stick to their own game, are expected to win, and perhaps even win comfortably.
Yeah, a lot of star names there in those lineups. And just very quickly, how important is this in terms of the canon of major successes for football teams? I mean, could they be proving that they are the best?
Manchester City are the best team in the world at the moment, but Pep Guardiola said if they don't win the Champions League, they won't go down in history. So he knows, fans know, and the wider football community knows they must win the Champions League to emulate Manchester United from '99 and go down in history.
Ben, thank you very much for joining us in Istanbul. Enjoy the game. We'll be speaking to you next week, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's it for the moment, but of course we'll keep you updated with what President Macron is doing in Annecy in France. And of course, we'll be looking forward to that very hot weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christie's, it's GB